start sharing my screen. Sarah, can you give me permission to share my screen? Sarah, can you hear me?
Lisa, this is Ellen. I can hear you.
Okay. Sarah Cadona.
Sorry, Lisa. Sarah was in the room talking to me. She's now going back to her computer.
Okay, that's why. Thank you. Okay, as soon as I start sharing my screen, we can go ahead and get started. But I want to be able to do that so it will appear that we have officially started.
Okay.
Hi, Chair Garvey.
Yes.
We are live and ready.
Oh, Sarah, if you can hold on for just a moment, I need to share my screen and I don't have the access to that.
Okay, hold on one moment.
And I didn't see, is Commissioner Roof here this evening?
I didn't see him, and I do see Dawn. Commissioner Bradley, hello. Yes, I see Dawn. I do not see Commissioner Roof.
Okay. Maybe he will.
Oh, I do see him now, connecting.
Right now, great. Okay, let me start to share my screen. I hope I can do that. And give me just a moment to make sure it's in the right settings. Let's see. I think there was a way that I can do it. If I can just get this away. I don't need to see the name. Let me try this. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
It's good.
Okay, good. Okay. Well, with that, and I do believe Commissioner Roof has joined us. I think we're
ready. All right.
We are ready. Okay. Turn it over to you, Ellen.
All right. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I will bring the meeting of the October 19th, 2020 meeting of the Planning Commission to order. We begin each meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lisa, may I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Can everyone hear me okay, first of all?
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Dugan.
Here.
Commissioner Iacopone.
Here.
Commissioner Bradley.
Here.
Vice Chair Roof.
Here.
And Chair Garvey.
Here. All right, next on the agenda is public comment. Public comment is limited to items not on the agenda. The Commission may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed as allowed by the Brown Act. However, the Commission's general policy is to refer items to staff for attention or have a matter placed on a future Commission agenda for a more comprehensive action or report. Is there anyone in the waiting room who would like to speak during the public comment period this evening? Anyone in the waiting room? Sarah?
We do have 2 callers.
All right. Good evening to caller number 1. You may begin speaking. Caller number 1, are you able to hear us okay? You can begin speaking now.
I have asked you to unmute. If you would unmute yourself.
one. I don't know if you can hear us, but we are not able to hear you. Maybe you are muted.
Try pressing *6. It looks like they hung up.
Okay, and you said we had 2 callers, so there's one other person in the waiting room. Second caller, you may begin speaking. Welcome.
Caller ending in 960.
You may be muted. One other person in the waiting room. Second caller, you may begin speaking. Welcome.
Hi there. I'm here actually for the La Ventana issue that's already on the agenda for today.
Okay, thank you. Then it's probably more appropriate for you to call in. It is more appropriate for you to call in during that agenda item. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other callers in the waiting room for public comment?
We do have one more.
Okay, good evening. Caller, you may begin speaking under public comment. Please give us your name. You may be muted. I can't hear you.
There is also a delay from the
Okay.
video, so.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Hello, I'm a caller in the waiting room as well. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I
Yeah.
can hear you. Did you want to speak under public comment?
I was also calling in about the La Ventana situation, so I'll wait as well.
Thank you. Anyone else in the waiting room for public comment?
Not at this time.
All right, moving on to the next agenda item, which is the approval of the minutes of our October 5th meeting. Does anyone have any changes to these minutes?
No.
I have no adjustments to the minutes, but I note that the agenda for that meeting included the approval of the minutes of September 21st. So for completeness, I think at our next meeting, we will need to also approve the minutes for 9/21.
Thank you, Commissioner Dugan. The city staff and I just discussed that earlier today, and I appreciate you raising that. And yes, we will have that added to the next agenda. Thanks for catching that. Hearing no changes for the October 5th meeting, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Commissioner Dugan moves to approve the minutes.
Bradley seconds.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Lisa, a roll call, please.
Commissioner Dugan,
Yes.
Commissioner Iacopone,
Commissioner Iacopone, you may be muted.
Commissioner Iacopone, roll call. Is he still with us?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Great. Commissioner Bradley,
Aye, aye.
Vice Chair Root,
Yes.
and Chair Garvey.
Yes. All right, our next agenda item this evening is a public hearing. I will read the procedure now for a public hearing. Staff will present a report on the history, physical features, etc., on the application, followed with the staff's recommendations. The applicant will make a presentation. Thereafter, interested members of the community may speak on the proposal. When all interested parties have had an opportunity to be heard, the hearing will be closed and no further discussion from the floor can be held. The commission will then consider the evidence and make its recommendation. If you challenge a public hearing item in court, you may be limited to raising only those issues you or someone else raised at the public hearing described in this notice, the public notice, or in written correspondence delivered to the city at or prior to the public hearing. Speakers will be called upon by the last 3 digits of their phone number and should state their name prior to addressing the commission. This will assist staff in preparing the minutes for tonight's meeting. Our first public hearing, and I'll read the public hearing that we're going to start. Properties on the north side of Crestview Drive between Marigold Lane and Clover Lane, APNs 049-450-999 and 049-460-999 and 049-470-999 and 049-480-999. Request to appeal the Community Development Director's decision to deny 29 out of 31 protected pine trees requested for complete removal in the common area of the La Ventana Homeowners Association. Does staff have a presentation on this item?
Yes, we do. And before I turn it over to the planner who will be presenting this item to the commission, I would just like to inform the commission that both myself and Andrea Martisich are available for questions this evening, as well as the project planner. And in addition to that, we do have the city's fire marshal, Gareth Harris, available this evening, as well as the contract arborist that reviewed the multiple trees associated with this project, Richard Huntington from Main Tree. And so with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Kevin. And Kevin, I can assist in advancing the slides. You just let me know when.
Sure, thank you, Lisa. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Kevin Beery, Assistant Planner in the Planning Division. And the public hearing item before the commission tonight is consideration of a request to appeal the Planning Division decision to deny the complete removal of 29 protected trees in the common area of the La Ventana Homeowners Association properties. Next slide. This appeal was filed by Kevin Collins on behalf of the La Ventana Homeowners Association. Mr. Collins is present tonight and will be making a presentation later during the public hearing period. The action before the commission tonight is to consider the facts of the original case, the reasoning behind the Planning Division decision to deny the permit, and the reasons to be presented by the appellant and any other concerned parties. Staff is recommending that the Planning Commission uphold the Planning Division decision to deny the appeal. Next slide. The La Ventana HOA site is approximately 17.3 acres in area and is located on the north side of Crestview Drive between Marigold Lane and Clover Lane. The lot is currently developed with multiple townhomes and a landscaped common area. The site is surrounded by multifamily residential development, open space, and Vista Park. Here are the basic facts. In July 2018, the Redwood City Fire Department inspected the La Ventana property and found multiple fire code violations in connection with trees and vegetation. As a result, the fire department cited the HOA and directed them to correct the violations by trimming tree limbs that extended within 10 feet of a chimney opening. After the fire department citation, the La Ventana HOA filed an application with the Planning Division for the complete removal of 31 protected trees for fire safety purposes. Subsequently, Planning Division staff held a joint meeting with both fire department officials and the city arborist for the purpose of confirming the standards used by the fire department in determining whether a tree qualifies as a substantial fire hazard. After this meeting, the city arborist inspected the trees and ultimately recommended the preservation of 29 out of the 31 protected trees based on the fire department standards. The fire department also re-inspected the site and determined that the property fully complied with fire code requirements. Finally, in agreement with the recommendations and findings of both the city arborist and the fire department, the Planning Division decided to deny the complete removal of the 29 trees. Next slide, please. These slides show the approximate locations and species of the trees included in the applicant's tree removal permit request. As you can see, they're distributed throughout the properties. This is the west side of the La Ventana HOA, and the next slide is the east side of the La Ventana HOA. Next slide, please. A permit to remove a protected tree on the grounds of fire safety may be granted only if the findings can be made that the tree is a substantial fire hazard pursuant to the required findings listed in the San Carlos Protected Tree Ordinance, the text of which is shown here. For the record, protected tree ordinance regulations are specifically provided in San Carlos Municipal Code section 18.18.070. In cases where an applicant states that the reason for removal of a protected tree is a substantial fire hazard, the Planning Division defers to fire department officials for a recommendation on whether a tree qualifies as a substantial fire hazard. Next slide. According to fire department staff, the only two conditions under which a tree qualifies as a substantial fire hazard is if the tree is dead or its branches extend within 10 feet of a chimney or stovepipe outlet. Therefore, Planning Division staff evaluated each tree and found that none of the trees qualify as a substantial fire hazard based on the review by the city's licensed arborist. Accordingly, staff was unable to make any of the required findings in order to grant approval of a protected tree removal permit. Next slide. In advance of this hearing, staff completed all noticing requirements, including mailing a notice to property owners within 300 feet and publishing a notice in the newspaper. Staff has received a total of 7 written comments on the application, 6 of which expressed support of tree removal for fire safety purposes. 5 of these comments were received after distribution of the meeting agenda packets. 1 comment received expressed support of tree preservation because the trees do not meet the fire department's fire hazard criteria. Next slide. Here's the text of a motion to be used should you decide to uphold the Planning Division decision to deny the appeal and uphold the Planning Division decision. City staff, including the city arborist, fire department officials, the city attorney, are all present and available to answer any of your questions. The appellant is also here tonight and would like to make a presentation on behalf of the La Ventana HOA. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Kevin. That was a very good presentation. Fellow commissioners, before we hear from the appellant, are there any clarifying questions any of you have for Kevin? And I should interrupt and say, I guess it's not only Kevin is here, but we have the arborist, Mr. Huntington, and Chief Harris, the fire marshal. Any clarifying questions?
Yes, I have a question on the list of potential findings that could be used, diseased tree, etc. Can you show that slide again? The fire hazard is, I see it's Roman numeral number 9, but there's a variety of other standards that one could assess the tree under, in addition to the substantial fire hazard.
That is correct. There are multiple findings for removal in the protected tree ordinance.
Yeah. Okay, good. I was curious to see. But when the request to remove the tree is made, is it a requirement that the finding that needs to be verified is specified, or is it is that up to the applicant to?
Yes, this is Kevin Berry, Assistant Planner. When an applicant submits a protected tree removal permit application, they are required to specify the reasons for removal of the tree.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's all I have on this for now. Thank you for letting me study that in a little more detail.
Yeah, hi, Kevin. John Dugan here. My questions are, so I understand that's the criteria, and number 9 there is a substantial fire hazard, and that's been defined as dead or within 10 feet of a chimney. Do we know the history of that? Do we know when that was last updated? Are we confident as a city that that's still the appropriate standard given the increasing threat of wildfire?
This is Kevin Berry, Assistant Planner. For the question of whether a code is applicable, I would defer to the fire department officials. We have the fire marshal present and also fire prevention officer present to answer any questions you may have about fire department standards and code requirements. And they may be able to provide you more information.
I do appreciate that, and let's hear from them. But do you happen to know the date that we adopted that standard, just for reference?
Mr. Dugan, I'm looking for that right now for you. Okay. It'll probably take me a minute. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you.
And through the chair, I will share to answer Commissioner Dugan's question that the last time that the zoning ordinance was updated, which is where these code sections are contained, was last done in 2011.
Okay. And but that's just in general. That wasn't necessarily this provision,
right? These were adopted in 2011. However, it could be that they were rolled forward from a prior city code, a zoning code, which is what we're going to be checking.
Okay. Well, I mean, if it's easy, that's interesting context. But really, let's hear from the chief. I that's what most beneficial.
Good evening. This is Gareth Harris, Fire Marshal. In general terms, when it comes to fire safety related to trees, the code looks at the fact that the property is in a fire hazard severity zone, and therefore the entire property has to adhere to Public Resources Code and related to defensible space. So specifically, the code doesn't talk about a single tree and what would constitute a fire hazard. It's more of a global view of the concept of providing adequate defensible space. And what does that mean, adequate defensible space? It's a complete disruption in the continuity of fuels. And so the location of the La Ventana property is at the top of a canyon, and below is heavy vegetation. And so the real threat is if there was a fire below that was burning up, we want that fire to run out of fuel before it comes up to the property. So the idea of having defensible space includes disruption of the continuity of the fuels, which has been done. There's been a lot of work underneath the properties, creating a defensible space zone around, and then mitigating the specific hazards in the Public Resources Code related to having tree limbs within 10 feet of any chimneys. So the idea of the substantial fire hazard still being part of a zoning code is really related to the fact that these are protected trees. There are other tree species like eucalyptus that are not protected, and so they don't even need a permit to be able to remove those. But these trees, because they are of the large diameter and they fall into the protected tree ordinance of the city, we look at each one of them individually. The property overall has relatively good defensible space, and this project, the entire community, is significantly better than it was back in the beginning in 2018 when we first had our inspector go out and cite because of all of the frankly, the lack of adequate defensible space. And so there's been significant improvements. And the idea of removing the trees to remove all fire hazard is really not accurate, because we have fully combustible construction. And so it's part of the process of having adequate defensible space. You can have healthy limbed up evergreen trees that don't pose a substantial fire hazard. And that's the case with the trees that we're talking about. Now, part of the history includes bringing in the state deputy fire marshal for San Mateo County and our deputy fire marshal, as well as fire inspector Noe. And they went through the entire property and looked at every single tree with the city arborist And so we sort of defer to some of the state expertise because, frankly, they write the regulations that we then automatically adopt when we adopt the fire hazard severity zone maps as a city. Then we also get what comes along with that, and that includes the public resource code requirement for all the defensible space and the prescriptive requirements for having tree limbs farther than 10 feet from chimneys. That's where that comes from. So I'll kind of stop there because I probably went way beyond what you were just asking a simple question, but I wanted to just make sure that everyone had a good understanding of the global view of the defensible space on this property. And frankly, I wasn't involved in all of the specifics of looking at every individual tree, but I do have some of my staff here that are available to answer questions. Both Deputy Fire Marshal Nicole Stoneley and our Fire Prevention Officer, Daniel Noe, assigned to San Carlos, are both available to answer specific questions because they were the ones that went through and looked at every single tree.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Fire Marshal Harris. That's helpful. So I just want to accomplish two quick things. First, I think I heard you, we have this definition as a substantial fire hazard. So you are professionally confident those trees do not constitute a substantial fire hazard?
I'm going to defer to my staff because they're the ones that actually looked at every single tree. I did not, but my staff has made that determination in concurrence with the state Cal Fire inspector as well as the city arborist. So that was the conclusions that they drew once they looked at every single tree there.
Okay, because what I'm also reacting to is just the very objective nature of our standard, that to be a fire hazard tree, it has to either be dead or close to a chimney. And it strikes me we would want a more subjective standard. Just, if a professional determines it's a fire hazard, then that should be it. So let me just ask that question. Are you confident in our standard as a city that a tree can only be a fire hazard if it's dead or within 10 feet of a chimney?
My personal opinion is that you could expand on that, but that is what's in our regulations, the municipal code. The reality is any tree can become hazardous if it's not well maintained. And specifically the pine trees shed a lot of pine needles, and those pine needles need to be managed. They need to be cleared off the roofs. They need to be cleared off the ground around them. And the idea of maintaining them is something that's included in trying to maintain defensible space. A large diameter, healthy pine tree in and of itself is not necessarily hazardous, but it can become hazardous if it's not managed properly, if it's not maintained. It can create a hazard by the fact that it dumps so many pine needles.
Got it. Okay, so it seems like we do have a species of trees that can lend itself to not being particularly safe, and we have a community that wants to change those trees, not get rid of those trees, but substitute those trees. Is that correct, Kevin? They're proposing a replacement of trees?
This is Kevin Berry, Assistant Planner. The applicant has not officially submitted any documentation of a landscape plan to replace trees. They have verbally expressed to staff, I believe, that they plan on replacing trees, but they've never formally submitted a replacement tree plan.
Okay. Well, we can save my further thoughts for deliberation, but just in general, I just want to make sure we're not applying a rather mechanical objective standard to a situation that might require more judgment. That's all.
Through the chair, our ordinance, when a permit is granted for tree removal, there is a provision that the planning director review the replacement of the trees with other plantings. It doesn't necessarily have to be more trees, but it could be more trees. But if it's a tree, it has to be a 24-inch box specimen at an appropriate location. So, and I might add that we're focused tonight on the substantial fire hazard, but there's 8 other findings, and then there's actually 2 additional ones about whether or not something is necessary to protect property. So although we are focused on that fire hazard one, that what's before you is not all the other issues. I think like an example is talking about the pine needles. I mean, that theoretically could be a nuisance, so that's covered by our ordinance, but there are ways to mitigate that nuisance by maintenance. So, you know, if we're trying to create, when we review appeals like this, we're looking at the facts and looking at the findings. And again, I'm like a broken record with this, but you know, we have to tie the findings. If we're going to make a decision, we have to tie the facts to the findings and then make your final decision based on that. And then one other point, I should have said this earlier before you started to ask the questions. This is essentially a de novo review of the staff decision. So you have the ability to re-look at all the evidence and all the facts and circumstances of the appeal to determine if you can make the findings. And you have the ability to ask questions and receive testimony that might inform that decision. So just kind of trying to keep you focused on what's before you and how, if you have questions about what staff's recommending, if you want to change those, you know, we look at facts and circumstances to justify some of those changes.
Through the chair, if I may, this is Lisa Porras, planning manager. I just wanted to make a brief announcement. We have received, I don't know, it says there are at least 6 people. People are already starting to call in to make a public comment. And I just wanted to announce that if any members of the public are listening and want to call in, they're going to be held in a waiting room until we call them in one by one. So I, again, just wanted to make a brief announcement regarding that.
Thank you, Lisa. Very helpful. Any other clarifying questions of staff, the fire marshal, or the arborist before we give the appellant and his team an opportunity to make a presentation?
Yes, Bradley here. A historical question for the fire marshal or his staff. I live on Crestview and Club Drive in the condos just across the dog park from La Ventana. And I heard after I moved here that some 50 years ago, there was a fire that came up Devonshire Canyon. And like Ventana, La Ventana condominiums, the Crestview condominiums are at the very top of Devonshire Canyon. I think it was in 1973. Do you know that as a fact, or was there something later or earlier? Could you tell us the fire?
This is Gareth Harris, the fire marshal. My understanding is that, yes, it has been 50 years since a fire came through Devonshire Canyon. The specific dates and the amount of homes that it took out at the time, I wouldn't be able to answer that. But there has been a significant amount of vegetative growth in that canyon since the last time it burned, which was many years ago. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
And that's why we did work with the Homeowners Association to put in a defensible break below the homes right at the top of Devonshire Canyon. So fire runs out of fuel before it gets to the homes is the ideal goal.
Yeah, we've done the same thing over here at Crestview too, I believe. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioner Iacopone. I would very much appreciate Fire Marshal Harris for hearing from your staff who actually did look at the site and their findings, their observations that led them to the conclusion that we're discussing, which is that none of the 29 trees identified are deemed a substantial fire hazard. So if we could, it'd be great to hear from them.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicole, do you want to address that, or would you like Daniel to?
Hi, Nicole Stoney, Redwood City Fire Deputy Fire Marshal. So to address your question, both myself and Daniel Noe walked through the site on numerous occasions. Most of what we spied was back when the property was built, the trees that were planted were not thought out for a long-term process. So you've got Monterey pines, and they have grown to excessive heights, and they were planted in close proximity to homes within 10 feet of each other. That's not something we would do today, but at the time, they were well-limbed, maintained. The HOA did an excellent job of making sure that needles were cleaned up semi-annually, both on the ground and in the gutters. They did an excellent job with defensible space back from the homes into the canyon. And then Daniel Noe and myself also worked cohesively together with city agencies and other departments to provide additional defensible space. So it was our professional findings that, based on given current standards of what was on the property, in conjunction with current standards today, the property in itself was very well maintained, and the threat of fire was extremely low given the maintenance of the property and the HOA's standards.
Great, thank you. That's quite helpful. Maybe the only follow-up that I would have is there's been mention of needles, and that, so I guess, you know, were there a lot present, or were they well taken care of by the maintenance? And then separately, are they differentially a greater fire hazard just by their nature? So 2 questions. Was the property well maintained with regard to needles that had fallen on the ground? And then separately, are those needles like a greater concern to you when you look around the property?
So Nicole Stoney, to answer your question. So first and foremost, yes, needles are always a concern. The volume and depth of the needles is what we look at. So for example, a tree that just has a recent fall from, let's say, inclement weather. We've got high winds coming, fall and winter is upon us. You're gonna have much more debris on the ground. We found, both Daniel and myself, upon all of our site visits, that the needles that were on the ground were minimal. And what was there was literally just the amount that had collected within the week or so in between maintenance coming in to do their monthly maintenance. So it was extremely clean in our professional findings. As far as the volume, you would need a large accumulation. Something that you would step upon and your shoe would actually sink within an inch or so of that that amount of depth on the ground. That's what you want to avoid. You don't want an accumulation. You don't want a compact amount of needles. That does provide a fire concern. And that's not something that we found on site.
Good. Thank you. That's real helpful.
This is Gareth. Can I add to that just a little bit? You know, the issue with pine needles is that the real danger is if there's a fire somewhere else, say down in the canyon, and burning brands are sent aloft with the winds, we don't want them to land on anything that becomes a receptive fuel bed. And pine needles on the roof could become a receptive fuel bed, ignite, and then ignite the roof, even though it is a rated roof, because the rated roof is still combustible, but it's based on withstanding the amount of heat release from, say, a Class A burning brand, which a large pile of pine needles on the roof could exceed the BTU output of a Class A burning brand and ignite the roof. And so that's really the big danger about pine needles. I mean, they're not going to self-ignite. They need an ignition source. But if we want, the concept is to eliminate the receptive fuel bed for burning brands to land on and ignite. So that's why maintenance is so important.
Great, thank you. And it sounds like the staff have both said maintenance appears to be quite good. So we'll take that as part of our background. I appreciate it.
Chief Harris, this is Ellen Garvey. I drove up there yesterday and drove into all the little streets and saw many of the trees. I didn't get out of my car and I wasn't able to see the defensible space that you referred to earlier in your comments. Can you just generally say, are you comfortable with the size and placement of this defensible space for this housing development?
You know, I'm going to call upon Daniel Noe, the fire prevention officer, because he's the one that managed the project to put in that defensible space barrier. And you're right, you're not going to see it from the driveways up above. You have to walk down and around below towards the Devonshire Canyon below it is where the defensible space break is. I mean, the real danger is from a wildland fire in the canyon below coming up the hill. So that's where we want it to run out of fuel before it hits the home. It also gives you the added benefit that in the event there is a structure fire, it prevents it from getting into the wildland. So the idea of defensible space works both ways. But Daniel, if you can unmute and just address the defensible space zone below that you and I walked the other day.
Sure. Hello, Commissioners. Daniel Noe, Fire Prevention Officer, San Carlos Fire. I first visited this property with Deputy Fire Marshal Nicole Stoney back in 2018. And like Nicole mentioned, there were some trees that were in need of trimming, branches being removed, etc. Those have been taken care of since then. The year after that, I worked very tirelessly with the Ben Lomond Hand Crew out of Ben Lomond, which is a CAL FIRE inmate crew. And Nicole helped as well for several days for 2 different seasons, removing on the downhill slope, which we're talking about from Devonshire Canyon, which is what Fire Marshal Harris referred to, and really we really exceeded the 100-foot clearance, okay, in a WUI standard, which is the Wildland Urban Interface. We have some areas that we don't have any vegetation within 300 feet of the homes. So we worked really hard to fall certain trees, remove combustible Scotch broom, coyote brush, and so on with the Ben Lomond crew. And that's really the area, if I lived in La Ventana, I would be really worried about is everything down below, because it's going to be a chimney effect as it comes up that canyon. So in my opinion, they have a very good defensible space. Underneath them, on the other side is Crestview. So we kind of have a natural break, okay, with Crestview going through. And then across that, we have the Crestview condominiums, which are also maintained very well. And we also take care of the park annually across between Vista and North Crestview Park. So we've really limited the fuels and the continuity of the fuel beds with maintenance of that every year. So in my opinion, any tree can burn in the right conditions, but I think they are sitting in a very good position. There's still more work to be done down below in the canyon, is what I've recommended to them. And I've offered our assistance in the future. And I believe they'll take us up on that once we have a slower fire season and we have COVID-19's, over with and so on, and we can get some more inmates out there. But I do believe that they are sitting in a very good spot with defensible space.
Thank you. Very helpful. Any last clarifying questions from my fellow commissioners before we hear from the appellant? All right, moving on. We'll next hear from the appellant. Kevin Collins represents the La Ventana Homeowners Association. Kevin, we normally allot 10 minutes for you. I didn't know if you had a team of people. You're free to allocate the time as any way you would like, or use up the whole time on your own. I'll turn it over to you now, Kevin Collins. Welcome.
Thank you. It'll be just me, and I'll probably have to talk a little fast to get through everything. Let me try to share my screen. I do have a presentation that'll help facilitate the discussion. Let's see how this works here.
Lisa, you are sharing your screen right now, so
I'm going to try to take it over if I can. Let's see. Sorry about this. I'm trying to get this thing to work. Oh. Let's do the other screen. Sorry. Let me try this again. All right. Not going to let me do it, is it?
No, but now that looks good.
Wait, which screen are you seeing? Are you seeing my notes?
We see it. We don't. At least I don't see the notes. I just see the single slide.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that. Sorry to delay everything. Hey, thank you, commissioners, for allowing me to speak today. And please jump in if you have any questions or if I'm going too fast or too slow. I'll tend to talk a little faster because I do have a number of slides and I want to keep the momentum going. But basically what I want to do is just provide some facts in support of the decision process regarding our request to change the species of trees. And then this is what I wanted to cover. I wanted to go back in time a little bit to where we all started. I want to talk just briefly about the building architecture, the landscape architecture and design principles. And then after that, the ongoing maintenance of our community, which is a Mediterranean community. And I wanted to just start very quickly by just mention the essential elements of community planning, development, and management. It feels odd saying this to a planning department, but we have, in a very small sense, do some very similar things. So, for example, when we go back into the 1980s, we came up with the Mediterranean concept. We had a blank slate. We started from scratch. And then we went into, was it the mid-1980s, we submitted building architecture plans with the building department in the mid-80s. And that was shortly followed up with a landscape architecture plans in, I think, the summer of 1988. And then, of course, the next step was approval of the plans, and we executed on them. And now we're in the process of the ongoing management of our community. And here's some clips of our actual plans. So diving right into the building architecture, again, it's a Mediterranean design. And I personally, I just love the Mediterranean design. It's a mix of some of the old California and new architecture. Notice the trapezoidal windows, it's sort of a new architecture. And of course, the terracotta tiles. So and in fact, the first house I lived in San Carlos, my family moved in 1962 into a beautiful Mediterranean home. So that's one of the things I love about San Carlos and La Ventana, for that matter. But when it came to the landscape architecture, we had provided very detailed plans. In fact, let me go over here. Just to give you an example, we identified the sizes and the number of each of the plants, where they were going to be planted, plants, trees and shrubs, talking about where they were going to be planted and the ultimate size, anticipated size and scale. So in this particular case, this is a eucalyptus, and these are the buildings. There's a gap between the buildings, and there were some, 5-gallon eucalyptus trees that were planted. And here's some pittosporum. shrubs with a small, with a smaller span that ringed around the space. Again, as I mentioned, we had very detailed plans drawn up. We planted 13 species of trees. A total of 677 were planted. As for shrubs, we had 25 species, over 5,000 planted. And in the ground cover area, we had 8 species. According to the plan, it was just over 34 acres. And the other thing that you'll notice about these plans, when you look at them, they incorporate the design principles. In fact, I pulled this, I think, from the San Carlos website, the principle of form. And I'm just going to read it, if you'll bear with me. Landscape design should consider the complete three-dimensional form of the landscaping, not simply the form of individual elements. The interrelationship of all landscape elements should be considered so that the final design presents a coherent whole. And that's what really is true when you look at this design. Oh, let me go back. Sorry, excuse me. Here are the elements. You see the crosshatch pattern? That's the ground cover. The big circles, of course, are the trees, and the smaller ones, the shrubs. And here's getting more specific. And the details of the plans were pretty impressive. They had the scale down to 1/16 of an inch was equal to 1 foot 0 inches. So here's an example of the canary pines that we're talking about between 2 buildings, and a camphor that's along a street. This camphor has a 10-foot radius. That's a branch length of 10 feet, and the canary pines were actually planned for 5 feet. And that represents the mature state of these trees and shrubs that are consistent with the form design principle. But, however, the design does not make provision for growth beyond the intended mature state of these trees. Now, the camphor trees, those pretty much, that was their final size. But the canary pines are going to grow much, much bigger. This 5 foot, just imagine a pine tree with 5-foot branches. Now, if we go and look today, I'm going to focus in a little bit. If you look at that one dot in the middle, and then the circle in the plan around it, that is the planned, that was what was part of the plan that was approved by the commission. But the red circle, the dashed circle, that's approximately where we are today. And so if you look at the footprint of this tree, the footprint of the originally intended one, footprint when I say that, I mean 12 noon, the sun shining straight down, what is the projection of the shadow on the ground in square footage? So it's about 78 square feet, which was in the plan, which meshes with all the other elements of the design. We are now at 4 times that, which is, 4 times it right now. And if we don't do anything right now, the ultimate size of these trees, the natural size, will be 9 times greater than was originally planned. And just as an analogy, it would be like driving past Arundel School, which is a 25-mile-an-hour school zone, at 100 miles an hour at 4 times. And obviously, if we let it get 9 times, that's driving at 225 miles an hour right past Arundel. So that is definitely a concern that we have. And another way of looking at the scale issue and the design principles is to do, and you'll have to bear with me on this a little bit, the vertical axis is the footprint of the square footage of these trees. The horizontal axis is time, going back, starting from late 1980s when they were planted, going forward to the full maturity of the trees. And if you just focus for a moment on the red, the lines, the red horizontal line, that represents what was in the plan approved by the commission. And that is that size, that 78 square foot, 5-foot branch, ultimate size that blended with the environment. And you can see the blue line, we grew up to that point and we've exceeded it, and we continue on a very poor trajectory. And if we look at the circles for a second, it gives you another perspective. Obviously, when they were planted, they were 5 and 15 gallon sizes. So if you look at the circle on the left, the red circle, that's the planned size. And when it was planted, it was much smaller. And then by the early 2000s, we probably grew into that full size that was contemplated by the architectural plan. So the ideal would have been to have changed the species once they reached or exceeded that size. And in fact, we did decide to do that back around 2009, 2010. Unfortunately, we never executed on that. So fast forward to today, this is where we are, about 4 times the footprint that was intended in the plan. So, you know, where does that leave us? So we're simply right now, we're just requesting permission to comply with the Planning Commission's approval of our original landscape plan. And what this will do, it will allow us to correct a serious out-of-scale situation with the canary pine trees wedged between our buildings. And it only requires us changing approximately 4% of the tree inventory in the original design. And it also, you know, importantly, brings our landscape design back into the La Ventana character, what was originally planned. So what in the world does this have to do with fire safety? Well, I mean, my answer to that is everything. And I wanted to start by just setting the stage. When we started here, it was back in the 1980s. So the conditions back then were much different than they are now, the environmental conditions. And I think the mindset and the concern about wildfire risk was quite different back at that time. So this is sort of an excuse in a way, because my question about the landscape architect, why on earth would a landscape architect propose the planting of highly flammable trees, 88 eucalyptus, and some of those were actually planted between our buildings in the 10 to 20 foot spaces between our buildings, and 85 canary pine trees? You know, why on earth would they do that? Well, we have to excuse them a little bit because of the mindset and the conditions back then. And then why on earth would the Planning Commission approve that? Again, you know, hindsight is 2020, so we can understand that. But why else would they do it? Why else would these be planted? And I believe the answer is that there are cost savings. Well, let me go back. Both species, they are both highly flammable, but they also grow very quickly. And that attribute allowed them to be planted in much smaller sizes. And that would allow for the quicker realization of the ultimate plan and the mature landscape scale at La Ventana. But even at the original scale intended, we would still have some fire risk concerns with the eucalyptus and the canary pines. But as an update, the eucalyptus are now gone, but we still have some canary pines between the buildings. And as a reminder, they're about 4 times the footprint that was approved in the plan, the original plan. And here's where our concern when it comes to fire safety lies. We are not just concerned about one source of fire, you know, embers emanating from a chimney. That can be handled by pruning or trimming. That's correct. But the broader question of fire safety in our minds is the continuity of fuel source, the fuel source. If you have a continuity of fuel, that means the fire can go from one end to the other. And we believe we should have a break in that continuity. And we feel also with these trees growing, we're going to have it's going to compound the problem in the future. So let me just illustrate. If these trees, for example, were to only grow to what was initially contemplated in the plan, only 78 square feet, we would still have some fuel continuity concerns. As you can see in this example, there's still some overlap, and if you have a fire in one kitchen, it could potentially go across this gap, we believe, to another unit over here. But that's only if they're really small. But today, this is what we're seeing. This is the size of these trees, the natural size. We believe that there are some serious fuel continuity concerns. And granted, yes, we have a defensible space, but this is a space between the buildings, and we are concerned about that. And I just have a little diagram there, or a chart down there on the bottom, just illustrating that we'd like to see a break in the continuity. And of course, if we let this go, if we do nothing about this today, this is what, when these trees get to their ultimate size, this is what we are facing. And I don't even have words to represent or to describe that. So just, you know, again, I'm rushing through this quickly. I want to, in the interest of time, but just the bottom line here is that we want the commission to grant us the permission to change the species on just 4% of the tree inventory in our original design. And doing so will, number one, allow us to comply with the Planning Commission's approval of our original landscape plan. Number two, it'll allow the commission to actually adhere to its own landscape design principles, which is the principle of form. And then number three, of course, allow us to protect our community against fire risk posed by these trees. And just as a final note, this is only the first phase of what we are doing. There's another phase that'll be coming up. That's why we're asking for your partnership in helping us to manage our community. We have some other trees. They're not fire hazards per se, but they are causing harm to our infrastructure. So we will be coming in and we will be submitting permit requests, and we will be replacing them with more suitable species that, and it's the harm to the infrastructure is from some destructive root activity. And we will be coming in trying to find or proposing more suitable species. I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. That is all. I know I ran through that very quickly. I certainly appreciate your time, and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Collins. That was a very good presentation. Do any of my fellow commissioners have any questions of Kevin Collins before we open it up to hear from anyone from the public who wants to comment?
Commissioner Dugan here. Kevin, thank you for the overview from your perspective. Appreciate that. You mentioned several times the concern is the continued growth of these trees. You know, we've heard they've been well maintained. Is there anything with your interactions with the city that makes it hard for you to prune or otherwise maintain the diameter that you feel is more appropriate for these trees?
Well, I think if we were to actually cut down to the diameter that was contemplated in the plan, there would be hardly any tree left. If you imagine, just imagine the trees, if you had seen those, seen them right now, they're, I don't know, what are they, 30, 40 feet high. To prune them down to have 5-foot branches, and also their height right now, there's not much we can do about that. Again, going back to that design principle of a form where there's no single element that stands out and everything has to be in harmony, we're already way away from that right now. I don't know that that can happen, and I think you mentioned maybe the maintenance. That is that becomes an economic issue too. It's going to be costing us thousands of dollars to continually be cleaning up the needles off the ground, but on actually the roofs are really, that's a very expensive proposition. We just got a quote, I think, for maybe $15,000 to do a cleaning off the roof and our gutters. And if we have to do that more often than a couple times a year, that's a financial concern. We don't bring that up here because we think the safety concern is the one that we should be talking about right now.
Okay. And then with regard to the safety concern, I mean, do you have any aspect of your presentation about the particular hazards of these trees? I'm no tree expert. I've heard this evening, I've heard a maintained pine is not a particularly unsafe species. Do you have any independent evidence or anything you could, do you have anything that you're trying to express that this is an unsafe species?
Well, yeah. Well, first of all, it's a pine tree, right? And then canary pines have pine resin that runs through the resin ducts all the way through the branches and all the way out through the needles. So I think it's pretty well known that both pines and eucalyptus are highly flammable.
Yeah, I'm not disputing that, okay. But again, I just don't know. It would have been helpful if your presentation had, had some evidence around, the problems with that particular species. And then finally, I didn't see anything in your proposal about the replacement of the trees. I think you've mentioned that. I mean, what would, so is there a proposal before the city now that you replace these trees, or you are right now technically only asking to remove them?
Yeah, I don't know that there was any provision for that in the permit process. That was, phase one, of course. But we have a number of trees that we proposed to replace them that are not as highly flammable, and would actually grow to the scale that's contemplated in the design plan. You know, like there's a coral bark Japanese maple, there are crepe myrtles. And again, we'd have to defer to an arborist depending on where the sun hits and everything. But the scale, we would make sure the scale was not such that we'd have these monsters growing right between our buildings.
Okay, it would help us to have more evidence on the problems with those particular species, and it also would have helped us if you actually had a plan for their replacement. But understand, I guess that's TBD. Is that underway? You're planning for that, or you're just waiting permission to remove them all, and then you guys will get to that?
As far as I know, we're waiting for the permission to remove them, and then we can move forward with the plan. Hey, one note I did want to make though that it confuses me a little bit is that, and I could be wrong here, but my understanding is that eucalyptus are excluded from this, from being significant trees, as are Monterey pines. And that surprises me a little bit because the Monterey pine is actually a native species that's endangered. And the canary pine is a non-native species and is not on an endangered list. So I do have questions or concerns about that. I don't understand from I guess a citizen's perspective. Just a thought while we're on it. Because, by the way, so that means we could have taken them down and replaced those trees if they were Monterey pines. It's my understanding. And I'd like to know why that is.
It sounds like that may be an issue that the arborist or staff can take offline. I don't know if they're here now to answer or if this is an appropriate time for that. But,
okay.
Make note of that issue. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions of Kevin Collins before we open it up to hear from the public? All right, let's open it up and hear from anyone in the community who would like to speak. Sarah, how many people are in the waiting room? Do you have a sense?
Currently we have 4, but let's put up the public slide and give it a few minutes for people to call in, but we can start with the 4.
Okay, what I'd like to do is to give everyone, give each person 3 minutes, and then if we end up getting a whole lot of people that would like to comment, I'll reserve the right to cut it down to less than 3 minutes at some future time in the meeting. But let's start off and give each caller 3 minutes. The first caller, welcome. You may begin speaking. Please give us your name. And you will have 3 minutes. And there may be a timer that comes up on the screen, although I'm not positive about that.
Through the chair, this is Lisa Porras, planning manager. I'm going to go ahead and set my timer to assist this, and I will put it right next to my speaker so it will notify us when we've reached those 3 minutes.
Thank you, Lisa. First caller, welcome.
Caller ending in 376.
Hi, this is Human Mohajeri from 16 Iris Lane. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Clear.
Great. Thank you for hearing me out. I called it in support of Kevin's case here, Kevin from La Ventana, and the appeal to be able to remove these trees. You know, I think when I heard the fire department speaking, their focus was on fires from the canyon, which is of course a concern. My trees are specifically on Iris and Marigold, and they're wedged right in between the buildings, two of the buildings, ours and one on Marigold. And my concern is if one of our houses catches on fire, this is going to be very, combustible fuel that's going to, spread the fire very quickly. I know we're doing the maintenance on the pine needles. I can tell you right now that the pine needles are all over the ground, around my balcony, in between the house, on my roof, and my gutter is stuffed with pine needles as well. So I do appreciate the fact that we're trying to save these trees, and I'm thinking that we can replace it with something else. As Kevin was mentioning, these trees are a big hazard, in my opinion, especially in light of all the fires that we've been having. This problem is going to keep on getting worse, as we're seeing in the area, and it just doesn't really make sense to me that we're not doing everything reasonable in our power. I know the individual from the fire department, the captain was mentioning that we're trying to get rid of risk altogether. That is really not the case. We understand risk is always going to be there. The buildings are flammable as well. But why can't we do what is reasonable within our power? And it seems like these trees are a reasonable aspect that we can remove and replace with something else that would be less of a risk. That was all I had. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Second caller, welcome. Please state your name. You have 3 minutes.
Caller ending in 703.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. You are, we're listening, and please give us your name and you may begin speaking.
Great, thank you. My name is Armin Boldy, 11 Tulip Lane. We support the City of San Carlos Planning Division decision to not approve the removal of the 29 pine trees at La Ventana HOA property. We are not aware if most homeowners in the La Ventana HOA would be in agreement for removal of all 29 trees. We do, however, support homeowners in consultation and agreement with neighbors to have specific pine trees removed and replaced on a case-by-case basis. We are very concerned how such a proposed blanket, general, broad removal of 29 trees will negatively impact our ecosystem, our community aesthetics, and our property values. As we heard from our fire marshal, Mr. Gareth Harris, he has stated in a later letter dated June 24th, 2020, quote, "The trees do not pose a fire hazard and can remain. The removal of any tree is not required at this time. We recommend continued trimming and pruning of trees as necessary to maintain compliance." So in conclusion, we support the City of San Carlos Planning Division decision. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next caller may begin speaking. Please give us your name.
Caller ending in 960.
Hello, this is Nancy Nafshar, and I'm the owner of 4 Marigold. I'm here in support of the removal of the pine trees. I have 3 of these pine trees wedged right between my house and my neighbor's house on Iris. As most people said, I do appreciate the fact that we have a great defense on the canyon side. What I am concerned about is the copious amount of pine needles and the closeness of the trees right now to my property and my neighbor's property. Just so everyone is aware, less than 2 days ago, I found a cigarette butt thrown in the middle of the pine needles. Now, we were lucky in that whoever threw the cigarette butt had actually put it out before throwing it into the pine needles. Had that not been done, with the amount of heat and everything else, the high temperatures that we're having, the likelihood of my house, my neighbor's house with whom I share a wall, and my neighbors on Iris, who are less than 5 feet away from me, we would have all been up in flames. Now, understanding that our only worry should not be a roaring fire coming up the canyon, there is a possibility of fire starting on the other side of Crestview. We live in a very high wind area, And ember from those fires can easily fly a mile, land into one of our pine trees on the ground where the needles are, and start a fire in our area. The community is densely populated. The structures are very close together. So should a fire start on one end of La Ventana, it can easily catch on within a few minutes and engulf the whole community. I appreciate tree preservation. I am all for maintaining the aesthetics of the community. There is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be allowed to replace these trees with trees that are more suitable for our community, and they provide less chance of fire starting or providing more fuel for a fire that may have already started. So I am really hoping that this commission reconsiders its decision and allows us to move forward and to provide a modicum of safety for the owners, our families, our properties, and also allow us to replace these trees with ones that are more aesthetically pleasing and safer for us to live here. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Is there another caller in the waiting room?
Caller ending in 510.
Welcome, caller. Please state your name, and you may begin speaking.
Hi, my name is Angela Nichols. I live at 4 Clover Lane, and we have been, there's currently let me go back. When we moved into La Ventana, the pine trees that were planted between 3 and 4 Clover Lane were not there. They were planted much later on. We worked with our neighbors because we were having major issues with these pine trees, which I have pictures of, that were touching both of our homes. Currently, the tree that was left, 2 were tagged for removal. 1 was removed. 1 has now stayed. Currently, that particular tree is within 3 feet of our home. And not only is it a fire hazard, and I can get to that, but it is also the trunk of the tree is now encroaching on the foundation of our home as well. We hired an independent arborist, no one that has a stake or even knows what's going on at La Ventana. He stated that the tree in which we were talking about is not only too close to the property, but also that the trunk, as I stated, is encroaching on the foundation itself, to support Mr. Collins' comment about how these trees have grown. In addition, CAL FIRE came out and said that it had to be trimmed so significantly to clear the chimney that it doesn't even look like a tree anymore. So I guess what I don't understand is, if we're trying to protect these trees and we keep hearing about aesthetics and canopies for shade and everything else, yet the gentleman that just spoke about his home on Iris and Marigold, we have the same issues with pine needles that are, and it's a blanket. I have pictures of that as well. So it may not have been walked. Each individual property may not have been walked, but I promise you there is a blanket of pine needles on the deck, in the gutters. We even have video of how the pine needles have significantly impacted the gutters, that the water, when it rains, like basically there's a waterfall onto the deck itself because they're filled. I guess what I don't understand is, if CAL FIRE stated, yes, it is a fire hazard, so you need to trim these branches to the point where it doesn't even look like a tree anymore. It literally looks like a Q-tip. So I don't understand the point of keeping a tree that essentially doesn't even look like a tree. And not only is it a fire hazard, obviously, because CAL FIRE said you have to keep it trimmed to a point that is, clears the chimney line, but it's also encroaching on the foundation because it was actually put in a place where there's not enough space in between. So, my husband and I are definitely for the removal. I'm not saying all 29 trees because I don't know what's going on with all 29, but definitely the tree between our homes, 3 and 4 Clover. And that's all really I have to say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The next caller in the waiting room, please state your name and you may begin speaking.
Caller ending in 544. Hello?
Yes, this is Carol Barrett. I live on Tulip Lane on the Canyon. I was on the landscape committee starting in 2008 up until a few years ago. We worked with fire department to do extensive clearing in the canyon to make it fire safe. A number of trees have been taken down in the past few years. My concern is by taking down these mature trees, we're going to lose a lot of the ambience and the value in the community because we have already lost numerous trees in the last 2 years that have been removed. We have a lot of deciduous trees on the property that drop leaves. The gutters are cleaned twice annually to account for this. If we're worried about the debris on the ground, we would have to remove every tree on the property. So I am for the Planning Commission's decision. I think it should be maintained.
Thank you very much for those comments.
About the debris on the ground, we would have to remove every tree on the property. So I am for the Planning Commission's.
All right, thank you very much. And the next caller, you may begin speaking and please tell us your name.
Caller ending in 378.
Ending 378.
Yes, my name is Ken Johnson from 10 Iris, and I'm in support of the tree removals. Well, one of our homeowners has characterized this as a view obstruction issue that predates most of us by 20 years or more. Today, it is a safety issue, but it's a safety issue that can be corrected.
378.
Yes, my name is Ken Johnson from 10 Iris, and I'm in support of the tree removals. Well, one of our homeowners has characterized this as a view.
Hi, Ken. If you could turn off one of your devices, if you're watching on your computer or TV, it will stop the feedback. It looks like he hung up. Chair Garvey, would you like to move on to the next?
Yes, let's move on to the next and let me know if he comes back into the waiting room.
Okay.
The next caller, welcome. You may begin speaking. Please tell us your name.
Caller 655.
Hello?
Yes, please tell us your name and you may begin speaking. Good evening.
This is Janet Tallett at 6 Daffodil in La Ventana, and I was I was on the board originally and worked on the permits for removal. So I've been in this process from the beginning. One of the things that Mr. Collins wasn't able to address was the tree replacement issue. We were never asked to provide a comprehensive plan for tree replacement. I'm currently on the landscape committee and I'm part of the tree replacement and tree committee. I don't have a comprehensive plan put together because we were waiting until we knew what trees were going to be removed to decide on replacement. So to Mr. Dugan's question about that, we do intend to replace trees. It may not be a tree for tree replacement depending on location, but the idea was to replace the trees.
The other thing I wanted to mention was I was at the walkthrough with Daniel Noe and Ms. Stoney, and during that walkthrough, we were cited for too many needles on the ground. Those needles are almost impossible to keep clear. We are working with our landscapers to try and keep those removed, but it really is a daily job to keep the pine needles off the ground. So when they said that they came up here and it was clear, it's possible that the next day we were filled with pine needles again. Also, we only have a plan for removing pine needles from the roofs twice a year because it's so expensive. So that is an ongoing maintenance problem that is almost impossible to solve. But I appreciate you're looking into the replacement issue of the trees, because that we do plan to do. And I didn't want the commission to think that we weren't looking into that. We are very conscious of replacing the mature trees and putting something in more appropriate for the property. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, welcome. Please give us your name and you may begin speaking.
Caller ending in 237. Caller 237.
Hello. Yes, that's me. Thank you. Thank you for listening to me. Do you need to know anything about me, or
please go ahead? State your name and then you may begin speaking.
My name is Danny Perotti, and I just have a few things to say. I was on the landscape committee for about a year, and during that time, the fire chief and his crew came up a couple times, and I remember sitting. I live right on the canyon where goes down deep into, and where the wind blows, and you can go down deep into, and you see the all the brush and everything. So I remember talking to the crew. And they mentioned two things that was really interesting. They said, first of all, is what your chief said, that the fire goes much faster going up the hill. And he said, and this would go really quick because we're so steep. But they all said something really interesting, and I didn't hear your chief say that. And that maybe he did. I was off and on. I was blocked. And they said about the embers. And we are about 25 feet to 100 feet of space before all the brush and the trees and everything. But they said something really interesting about the ember, and the embers can fly about 1 mile to 2 miles. And if I read all the issues that we had over the last 3 months with the different fires, it was the embers that really caused the most damage. So what they were saying is those embers, it's not so much that they could stop the fire, it's they couldn't stop the embers. The embers would, if they hit any one of those trees, this is what the fire department said. It would go up like a rocket ship, and your place would be destroyed. Now, if any of those embers hit, let's say they hit our wooden decks. Our wooden decks are made of Trek, which is fire resistant. That would give them. They said that would give them a shot to save it. But the embers hitting those trees, it would be dead. The other thing they said, number two, was where these trees are, where they're situated at, is in between the units, and that blocks them from doing their job. They would have a hard time getting down there to fight the fire. They couldn't get their equipment down there. That's number two. And number three, they're going to have a hard time getting insurance if we don't do something. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Danny, for those comments. To the next caller in the waiting room, please begin speaking and please state your name.
Caller ending in 720.
Hello. Hello.
Yes. Good evening.
Please, I'd like to make a statement. Is this the right time?
Yes, we're on agenda item 6A, the La Ventana appeal. Is that the agenda item you'd like to speak on?
Yes. I want to talk in regards to La Ventana.
Yes, please give us your name and then you may make your statement.
My name is Mazen Scaff, and I've been a resident of La Ventana since 2002. And I apologize that I'm not with you in person. I'm not sure if I had the opportunity to do that, but I'd like to make a statement, and it's very much in line with an email I had sent back in September 2018, and it's in the packet that our neighbor and champion Ron Abilaya has put together for the review by the city. First of all, I'd like to applaud the position that Ron and the effort that Ron and other members of the community have put to protect the trees that are not, it's not justified to cut them. He's been persecuted by certain members of the board, and I'm very dissatisfied with that, to say the least. That's not the way to treat people who are conscientious and doing their job of protecting the environment and protecting the values of our properties. Second, I'd like to highlight from a decision-making perspective, cutting a tree is a major irreversible decision. So people who are advocating for cutting a tree or a set of trees or a very large number of trees, as is the case by this board, need to make sure that they've done the right analysis before getting the saw going or cutting the tree, because it's an irreversible decision. And I haven't seen the analysis that corroborates such a move or recommendation, and it's totally against what the fire department has advised. So the fire department in their letter and findings advised that the live trees should be limbed and maintained properly. And then the board seems to be wedded with a certain outcome, and they've been spending resources of the community irresponsibly to achieve a certain outcome, either driven by a lack of knowledge totally, or by a certain personal agenda. And in either case, it's not acceptable. The second thing is that the removal of live trees will have an adverse effect on the value of our properties, and replacing the trees that they want to take out will cost at the very least $4,000 to $10,000 per tree, and you'd obtain a much smaller tree that's unattractive and you have to wait for it to grow. Granted, in some cases, there are some trees that need to be limbed or taken out, and the fire department is the reference on this. It's not the board's agenda or decision to call which trees should be removed or otherwise. And then we talked about the irreversibility of such a decision. Then there's another issue. Given that La Ventana sits on the top of a hill with steep inclines in different parts of the property, removal of live pine trees, especially in the steep inclines towards the canyon, will have serious adverse implications on soil stability. And also it will have unforeseen adverse effects on the overall ecosystem, disrupt the habitat of birds of prey in the area, and that this helps keep pigeons away, and it may have other repercussions. So I find it extremely irresponsible for a board to come up with a recommendation to cut so many trees at once without looking at the analysis and all the implications of this. So in summary, I'd like to defer to the fire department and the experts from the city. I'd like to make sure the voices of people like Ron and other members of the community who are calling for the trees not to be cut to be heard without persecution, without vilifying these people. And I'd like to make sure that people defer to the experts and to the city in such major decisions, please.
Mosan, thank you very much for your comments. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. The next caller in the waiting room, please begin speaking, and please state your name.
Caller ending in 960. Try pressing *6 if you would like to speak.
Hello?
Yes. Yes, welcome. Please begin speaking, and you can begin by giving us your name. Thank you.
I've already spoken, so I'm not sure why the host is coming back to me.
Oh, thanks for letting us know that. We'll go to the next person in the queue. Thank you. To the next person in the queue, welcome. You may begin speaking, and please begin by giving us your name.
Caller ending in 607.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please begin speaking and begin by giving us your name.
Yes, hello. This is Christina Bormann-Chang on 10 Tulip Lane. I'm in favor of removing the trees next to my home. I have 3 pine trees right next to my home. They're all less than 10 feet from my house. 2 of them are less than 5 feet. They're extremely close. 2 of them are also very close to the chimney. They're constantly shedding a lot of needles onto the roof and onto the deck and also onto the floor. We're cleaning our needles almost every week on our deck, so it's pretty much impossible to keep the roof clean of needles all the time. Those trees are a fire hazard, so close to the house. We're worried if there's embers flying from another fire, and they could catch fire if they land on those trees. The trees are also really close in proximity to each other, so if one of those trees catches fire, all of those would catch fire. Yeah, so I'm in favor of removing those trees, and I thank you for your consideration.
Christina, thank you very much for your comments. Next caller in the waiting room, you may begin speaking, and please begin by giving us your name.
Caller ending in 720.
Hello, caller. Can you hear us? It's your turn to speak, and please begin by giving us your name.
I already made a statement. I just want to see if I can listen in to the hearing, if it's possible.
It is possible to do that. You can just go on Zoom and enter in the meeting ID, or you can, I believe, listen in on your phone.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Sarah, I'm curious if our caller Ken, who had some technical difficulties and hung up, was he able to get back in the waiting room?
I do not see his number.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else in the waiting room?
We do have one more.
All right, caller, welcome. You may begin speaking now, and please give us your name.
Caller ending in 512. Try pressing *6.
Hello?
Hello, yes, welcome. You may begin speaking. Please begin by giving us your name.
Yes, I'm Rana Bilaya.
*6.
Excuse me, we're having some technical difficulties here, so let me kill the Zoom and I'll just go.
Hello, yes, welcome. You may begin speaking. Please begin by giving us your name.
I apologize here.
That's all right. Yes, I think if you can mute one of your systems, the feedback will stop.
Okay. Okay, how's this working?
That's working great. You may begin, Ron.
Okay, thanks. I'm totally audio. The Zoom is failing me. I cannot see the proceedings. I live in La Ventana. As mentioned before by another speaker, I've been very active in preserving, attempting to preserve the trees in development. And I'm also the original appellant who appealed to the planning department to hold off on permitting these trees to be taken down. I find myself in a difficult situation today because many of the comments made by previous speakers for and against, I think are all valid. I think all these concerns people have raised are worth consideration. The reason I originally appealed to put a hold on these trees being taken down, and I still believe that today, and I totally support the commission's, the planning staff recommendation. The reason for that feeling is that the original reason for removing those trees and the process that our community went through to come to some sort of a consensus on how to proceed forward was flawed. The entire original reason was entirely dictated by the concerns of one individual, perhaps one with a few allies. That concern being that these trees were obstructing views. And this alternative plan came along where the trees could be removed as fire hazard, and it would sort of get around the fact that you can't remove trees for views. As controversial as that point of view may sound, I fully documented how that happened, how it developed, and I give the entire history in the written statement I submitted. What I would like to do right now, though, given all the other comments made, is call the Commission's attention to one particular document in my statement. I don't recall exactly which one it is. It's sort of towards the end. It's an appeal by one of our members, not myself, but just one of the other members of our community, to get the community together to discuss where we want to go with these trees. Who has concerns about pine trees? Who wants to replace pine trees with some other kind of species? Get it all together, work on that plan internally, and come forward with a good way forward and also more united. As things stand now, we have not been able to sit down and work together on the different ideas and different issues that various members have, because the entire process was driven by that singular issue: get rid of trees that are obstructing views. Thank you. That's all I want to say this evening.
Ron, thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you.
Sarah, any more people in the waiting room? And did we ever hear back from Ken, who we had some technical difficulties with?
We did not, and there's no further callers.
Okay, let's just see what's going on now.
All right, no other callers in the waiting room. If there's no other callers in the waiting room, I would entertain a motion then to close the public hearing. And everyone that's still listening in on Zoom and or on the phone, please feel free to continue to listen in. I'm simply calling for a motion to close the public hearing.
Jacopone, I move to close the public comment period.
David here, second that.
Lisa, a roll call, please.
Commissioner Dugan?
Yes.
Commissioner Jacopone?
Yes.
Commissioner Bradley? Commissioner Bradley?
Commissioner Bradley, press *6 to unmute yourself.
Hello?
Hello, Don. We are calling the roll to close the public comment period.
Bradley, I vote yes.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Roof?
Yes.
And Chair Garvey?
Yes. All right, we've heard from staff, we've heard from the appellant, and we've heard from the public. I'll now open up the meeting for discussion and deliberation amongst my fellow commissioners. Who would like to start?
Bradley will start.
Yes,
I wondered when we would get to the question of view being the primary mover of removing these 29 trees. From what I read in nearly 400 pages that you read before this meeting tonight, it evolved out of the concern for people's views, not fires. However, I don't see in the list of 9 things required is number 9 was fire hazard, which we've dealt with by hearing from the fire marshal and others about the defensible space zone. But I don't see anything else that says we have to, if somebody doesn't have a good view of the bay, that we have to cut their trees down. So I think the issue was views, not fires. But let me please run through something. Being a planner myself, over the years, I've found that planning is always controversial, always complex, and always needs compromising. So I made a list of the big picture, not just tree by tree, but starting with a view. That's a plus to cut them down and improve people's view. Then there's privacy. They do serve a purpose of providing privacy, especially in between the units where most of them are. The fire hazard, we've heard from the fire marshal. I needn't repeat that. People talking about their roofs burning. They are tile roofs. They don't ignite easily. Also, any kind of tree provides cooler walls in the summer and also warmth in the winter. So those are pluses to keep the trees. The maintenance factor, there are pluses and minuses. It will be expensive, like $50,000 to $100,000 to cut down those 29 trees, if my figures are correct. On the other hand, you won't have to trim them, which is expensive also. So that's a wash, pluses and minuses, I suppose. The idea about cutting the trees down to limit the pine needles on somebody's deck, I feel sorry for them having to rake their leaves, but I don't see that that's a big point of, it's an issue with your gardener to keep it clean. We have the same thing. I live 1,000 feet away from these people. We have the same problem, but we have people that with their noisy leaf blowers are out there at least once a week cleaning the leaves all year long. Aesthetics, I'd like to keep the trees for aesthetics reasons, and I would support trimming the trees, and also if it's infringing on your foundation, for God's sake, do whatever it takes to get it removed. I would support them one by one being removed that way, but not 29. 29 doesn't seem like a huge number of trees when they planted 677, I believe he said. Somewhere I read that the residents are in 70% support of keeping the trees. So I'm in favor of saving the trees, but trimming them so they meet the code and the fire requirements, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bradley. Anyone else? I'll jump in. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you, Ellen. Maybe if we could ask our law director to say again, we've heard a lot of a wide range of pros and cons, and I think Commissioner Bradley just did a great job of, kind of putting the two columns together. It would be great to hear and to clarify what is before us tonight, and maybe the way I understood it. So it'd be great to know the way I understood it. There was a decision by our planning department there to deny. There was an appeal, and the appeal was based on fire hazard. And is it right then our job is to keep it narrow to the issue of this element 9 on the list, or is this fair game to be considering a range of other things in making our judgment?
I think that's a very good question. The appeal, the evidence that you have before you is based on the, other than the oral testimony tonight, is based on the issue of fire danger. It's not really there addressed to some of the other findings that could possibly be made. But since this is a de novo review, you are allowed to take evidence of other issues, but keep in mind that in order to make a finding, it has to be based on substantial evidence in the record. And I have we've heard statements by the public, and sometimes that can be considered substantial evidence on the record. But what we have is expert testimony from our fire department that the trees are not a fire danger when properly trimmed and when maintained. And then we have other issues that could implicate some of the other findings, but I'm not sure that you have the evidence to do that. But that's your call, not my call. So if you cite to some evidence that you think is compelling, that's how you make that finding.
Great, thank you. That's helpful.
Let me jump in here just to further understand, Greg, what you explained to us. So let's say we were convinced that one of the trees posed a hazard to the foundation. Would we be able to say that tree should go and the others no? I mean, are we allowed to? I'm not saying we actually have the evidence to do that, but
you could ask for more evidence too, yeah. But that would require asking the appellant to provide that, or to deny the appeal, and then they can file another permit based on a different reason. So that's a possibility too. But yeah, I think because it's de novo, which just is Latin for a second look at something, a new look at something. I think you could, if there is substantial evidence, you could look at one of the other findings and say, yeah, that particular tree is one that I'm convinced that there's substantial evidence that I can make this finding for it. You know, whether it's causing damage or whichever finding you're thinking of looking at for that one. And I think that's important, but that I don't know which tree that is, so right. It would have to be identified and all that. So
yes. So I'll give my initial thoughts on this, and that is that if the application was made to remove a large number of trees based on the fire hazard, and we have pretty strongly stated professional opinions that they do not constitute a substantial fire hazard, I would be a little uncomfortable overriding that directly. I'm sympathetic to some of the other reasons for the tree removal, but it's hard to apply that to all 29 of them. So I'm tending towards to not advocating that all 29 of them be removed, and I don't see a way for us to specify individual trees. We don't have that information in front of us.
David, I know I took a turn, but maybe just to build on, I thought great comments there. Look, I think in the seeds of a number of the homeowners, there is the great combination of how to preserve aesthetic, replacing trees, how to address fire, maybe a different species. It's not clear to me that any except for this notion of, let's say, the hazard against the foundation, that those rise to the level of warranting taking out a protected tree. So I guess I'm just a little stuck on these being protected trees. And let's say, as you suggested, we really all are sympathetic with wanting to help them through their issue. Like, what are the degrees of freedom they really have with protected trees? And it sounds like the foundation is.
That's probably an easy one.
An easy one, right?
I mean, some of the other findings that could be made is that it creates a public or a private nuisance, but that wasn't the in the application that the city staff denied. That wasn't the reason they were asking to take down the tree. The reason presented was they're a fire hazard. They asked a fire marshal to give a professional opinion on that, and the answer is not a fire hazard. So the staff says, no, you can't take down the tree. And so whether we can broaden it out wholesale for all 29 trees, even if somebody might say it's a nuisance because it's so close to your deck and it deprives you of being able to use your deck in a nice way. Maybe one of the trees would fall in that category, but I'm not sure we could, as a planning commission now, say that yes, all 29 of them would fall in that category. So it's a little hard to deal with these as one large package.
Good comments. This is Ellen. Another maybe follow-up question for our attorney, Greg Rubens. Is there anything that precludes La Fontana from being able to submit a plan to the city for review? If we were to affirm staff's findings, is La Fontana able to regroup and submit a more specific landscaping plan to the city?
Well, I think there's two different issues there. One is, can they reapply? Could you deny the appeal without prejudice so they could reapply? The answer is yes. You could do that if you wanted them to be able to present different grounds for tree removal. The part about the replacement of the trees, we didn't get to that point in this application, because what happens is staff may grant a tree removal based upon making the findings at the staff level, but then the director is allowed to require replacement trees that are reasonable. And he could require a plan for replacement on something like this, where there are 29 trees being proposed to be removed. He could ask for such a plan. So I think we just didn't get to that point here, because that'd be a condition to grant the permit that the director could attach to it. So since he denied it, he said there's no need to condition it. If he were granting it, he might condition it. So we didn't get to that point. But you have the ability to do that too in the appeal. You could grant and condition, because that's part of the code.
Yeah,
if you could make the findings, like I said before.
It's a bit of a circle because I'm hearing that they didn't apply for replacement trees because they were waiting to see how many trees they were going to be approved to remove. On the other hand, we don't know what the plan is because there isn't a plan, and I'm just
right. Yeah, that's true. But the way the code reads is if you felt like you could make one of the findings of each of A and B, because you have to make both at least one of both in order to remove the tree, to allow for removal of the tree, then you could condition it. But you're saying, well, we don't have enough information to condition it because that's not before us. So that would argue for maybe a bifurcated proceeding, or you can make if you can make the findings with a condition, but you can't make it without the condition, then I think that argues for you asking for more information on that. That's the only choice you really have in order to make an intelligent decision on what kind of conditions you'd want to attach. You would need more information, it seems to me.
And the findings require one of category A, 1 through 9, and one of category B?
Yeah, that's the way I read it.
Okay.
It says determination of the director in granting or denying the permit shall be based on making one or more of the findings under both subsections.
Yeah.
So I'm not reading that as just one of all, otherwise you wouldn't have an A and a B.
Yeah.
One's talked about necessity.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Looking at the map of the trees, some of them are squished right in between units, and I'm pretty sympathetic to the impact that those could have. And I can imagine I would agree that that's a nuisance or could causing substantial damage. But some of the others are a fair distance away from any building, and so I wouldn't be able to apply wholesale that kind of a finding. So we're sort of, I feel like we've had our hands tied a little because of the original application was based on it's a fire hazard, and we disagree, at least from the commissioners I've heard from, we probably disagree with that wholesale. We'd be sympathetic potentially on a case-by-case basis for some of the other ones, but we don't have the information in front of us to allow us to make any of these findings for a particular tree. So I'm fine. I feel like my hands are tied. I wouldn't be able to say yes, cut down 29 trees. This would be my take on this. I would be interested to know if there's a way to make it as easy as possible to ease the path forward. I mean, in terms of if we continue this or if we deny it without prejudice, so they could easily reapply, or I mean, whatever we can do to ease the burden, because I know they put a lot of energy into this, and it's a shame to say no and have a hard path forward.
Yeah, and they could come back if you deny without prejudice. They can come back with individual trees and maybe not all 29 as a group like they've come back with. But one of the things that I'm sure maybe I'm kind of crossing the line into being in the planning department, but so Lisa can correct me if I'm kind of missing something or off the mark. I mean, these ordinances are designed to be citywide. We're not just talking about just this development. So when you look at what findings you're going to make and what evidence you want to require to remove trees, you've got to think about every neighborhood in the city. It's not just about, so if you're going to say something's a nuisance because it's a certain type of tree, then every one of those trees in town is sort of in jeopardy. Even though each circumstance that I've always said is unique, it's still, you've got to just think about the implications citywide when you're going to make a finding. It has to be, that's why it has to be based on substantial evidence in the record, and not just, oh, well, this association or this group of homeowners kind of doesn't like that tree because for whatever reason it is. It really, you got to focus on the code and what is substantial, what is what evidence are you going to require to make that finding? You know, when you look at these, a diseased tree is pretty obvious. You get an arborist report, it has beetles or it's rotten. You know, that's the basis that some of the heritage oak trees might be, might have to be taken out. But the code isn't designed to allow a heritage tree or a protected tree to be removed except for these reasons, because of the values that when you look at the findings of this code section, the findings are aesthetics essentially, and the city in enacting this ordinance made that a priority that we have aesthetically, we want to have trees in town, and we do not want mature trees to be easily removed without making these specific findings. So that's a cautionary thing.
Good point, Greg. I'm reminded a couple years back we had to vote on removing 41 eucalyptus trees along San Carlos Avenue for a mile or so. So we have to look at not just the 29 trees, but the whole community, the whole city. As an alternative, they're asking us to get in their political battles, the board and the members, the residents that are for removing the trees and those that are against it. What Crestview does over here, and we've got heritage oak trees, if your view is blocked, and I had this with both my neighbors on both sides, they had to get me to sign that they could go to the landscape committee and ask for permission to, not on the heritage oak trees, but just to trim them because their view was in the way. And then the board wouldn't pay for it, so they had to take nearly $1,000 out of their own pocket to trim those old oak trees that are in the defensible space zone. You know, but there's a lot of remedies that they could be doing other than coming to us. I really think most of them are looking at for the view, not the fire protection. It's just that we're so conscious of fires since we've had the worst in history in California just within the last month or two.
Yeah. And I guess that, you know, I do think it is worth us deliberating and just recognizing the fact that, I mean, this is a high danger area of town at top of a hill. And I think those residents, they may have other concerns, but I think fire is a significant concern up there. And it does, so this issue does trouble me that, you know, we have a community that's coming forward. They feel like, you know, I mean, I'm no expert, but I do view pine trees as a heightened fire risk with the needles and you know, just the manner of a pine tree. Given my limited knowledge, I wish we had more evidence about the species this evening and some better understanding of it. Our fire experts said that a well-maintained tree generally resists fire, but I do think pine trees are further down the spectrum of more dangerous. So yeah, it is just kind of a troubling set of facts here, because then we don't have the plan. You know, if we did agree to allow the removal of this many trees, you know, what would they be replaced by, and is there an obligation that they replace them by? So, you know, perhaps we could attach a contingency, or perhaps we could continue this whole item until more of this evidence comes forward. You know, I would not necessarily oppose that, but it is a challenging application to take out all of these trees when it seems some are more concerning than others. And we are talking about trees that, you know, we do value. There's a reason we have a tree ordinance. It also seems like it's unclear we have a real consensus out of this community. And I never actually came to understand who was properly speaking for the community and whether there was a true consensus behind it or not. So we have this application. The other side that I'm concerned about, I do just want to pause and make sure as a city we're not mechanically applying an objective standard that might be too narrow given all the facts and circumstances here. I mean, as I understand it, we can only declare a tree a fire hazard if it's dead or within 10 feet of a chimney. I would be uncomfortable just assuming that we should stop our thinking and analysis at that point. Now, obviously, we had our fire marshal and other experts opine that there is a defensible space. So maybe that standard is acceptable even in this higher risk area, even in this higher risk period of time we seem to be in. But I don't want to move too fast past that. That would be another argument to continue and to understand that better. And then, we should all just take a step back and maybe even ask our fire experts, would you want these trees in your yard, right next to your house, given it likely is a increased fire risk on some level. So yeah, I'm a little torn. I think Commissioner Roof, I think you stated it pretty well. To some extent, our hands are a bit tied given the facts and as it's come towards us or as it's come to us this evening. But if there was a consensus to continue this item or to attach a condition that there is a comprehensive replanting plan committed to, I would, further consider that.
I had a quick comment about the process. Staff could have decided this issue on their own. And I really appreciate that they reached out to the experts, that they reached out to the fire department, and we have the fire chief here tonight. They reached out to their arborist. He's walked the property, looked personally at all of the trees, and they've reviewed the facts and they've made a recommendation to staff. I just want to say that I appreciate the process that the city went through to render a decision on this. These are the experts. I'm inclined to defer to the experts and agree that these trees are not a substantial fire hazard. But having said that, I'm also open to denying the appeal without prejudice or some avenue that gives the appellant a second chance to go back, regroup, and as Commissioner Dugan says, try to come to some consensus amongst the La Ventana community and what do they want to do, and are there certain specific trees that everyone can agree on need action, or is there a holistic plan, and to give them the opportunity to submit that plan, have staff review it, and then whenever it's appropriate, bring it back to the commission. That's one idea.
Greg, could you share just the definition of what without prejudice means? Like, what are we really saying? How does that work?
Well, what we're saying is that, in essence, we think the city is saying we're going to deny the appeal because you haven't provided us with sufficient evidence on these grounds, but there may be other grounds under which we could make the findings. So we want to allow you to reapply to try and justify your request based on different grounds. And it may become a different request because of that.
Got it. They wouldn't have to request all 29 trees. If they wanted to step back and say, look, there are other reasons that fit the criteria, right, and it's a subset of the 29, that proceeding and vote by us would allow them to do that.
Yeah, and it would start at the staff level. Staff would try to work again on whatever grounds and evidence that they've decided to come up with, and it could end up being appealed up to the Planning Commission again. And you know, there may be other avenues, I think, that are suggested, and I'd have to talk with staff about it. But you know, this is a planned development up there, so there might be a way to bring a new landscape plan to the commission for the whole development and modify it in that respect. Now, that's probably more expensive than individual tree removal permits, but you know, if what we heard was that the plan that we had is, this is sort of a double entendre, it's outgrown its usefulness because these trees are bigger than originally planned, then that might be that the avenue might not be this process. It might be a different type of application that would be based upon revising the plan development, which had a condition for a landscaping plan, I'm pretty sure. And then the third thing, I'm just going to suggest this because it seems like it may not have happened. Maybe it did happen, but under the Bacon-Sterling Act, when there's a dispute among homeowners in a homeowners association, before they go to court, they need to mediate. And this seems to me, based on my experience, that the homeowners and the board might want to mediate and come up with a solution that they could then present a unified plan to the city and based upon a result of mediation, which would have some of these findings developed as part of that process. And then we'd have a different type of proposal. It might not even get up to the Planning Commission. It might be something the staff could get behind.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go.
Mediation would be something they would choose to do, that we would not mandate.
Yeah, we would. Yeah, we wouldn't. Right. Yeah, it's voluntary. We would. Okay. We're not. I don't think we can condition that they mediate first before coming back to us. I'm just suggesting that.
Okay. Very helpful. Thank you.
I think I can satisfy most of you on this. I will move that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution to deny the appeal without prejudice and uphold the Community Development Director's decision to deny 29 out of 31 protected pine trees requested for complete removal in the common area of La Ventana Homeowners Association properties, but encourage the association to work up a landscape plan that their residents support and bring it forward back to the Planning Commission. And that's for APNs 049 450 999 and 049 460 999 and 049 470 999 and lastly 049 480 999.
Before somebody jumps in with a second on that, perhaps, I'm a little uncomfortable about sort of policing the consensus generation that the homeowners association has. They must have rules for how that's done. And I was sort of assuming that the applicant has standing to make the request. And as a planning commissioner, I find it a little hard to try to figure out how many people voted yes or no, and whether whether Kevin Collins was legally able to make that permit application with the city. It just seems
well, I'll be glad to delete that.
It would simplify it because everything else, those other little additions you made in there sounded good to me, but it just seems like we don't need to get into the consensus part of it. It's nice to hear.
I'll be glad to eliminate that part of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Bradley.
So I would move again that it be the same as in our page package number 9 motion. Only add without prejudice after deny the appeal in the first line.
For my part, I would second that.
All right, we have a motion and we have a second. Lisa.
Through the chair, if I may.
Yes.
Just staff clarification, because the last points that Commissioner Bradley made was to refer to page 9 and with referencing the motion, but the only addition is to insert without prejudice, which staff understands. However, I just want to make sure that the original motion, while Don was open to striking and getting consensus, Commissioner Bradley did mention direction to encourage the HOA to work up a landscaping plan and bring that back to the Planning Commission. So I just want a clarification if that was included in the motion or also stricken.
What was seconded was as written in the page number 9 of the package, just inserting without prejudice after the word appeal in the first line of the motion. What I said before, if I can remember correctly, was to encourage actually ask the homeowners association to submit a landscape plan.
For my part, I was seconding the formal motion that's in front of us only with the simple insertion without prejudice.
Right, yeah. And that's
what we have before us right now.
Okay, that I like.
I just didn't want to assume anything. I wanted to
I like not having the development plan. That could be a solution, or it may not be a solution that they would like. So I don't know that we need to get into that. Maybe just individual tree plan or something would be fine. So
I actually prefer it that way without what I added.
Okay.
Except,
yeah.
Just add without prejudice so they can proceed, start over if they wish.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. All right, Lisa, now I think we are ready for a roll call.
Commissioner Dugan?
Yes.
Commissioner Iacopone?
Yes.
Commissioner Bradley?
Yes.
Vice Chair Ruth?
Yes.
And Chair Garvey?
Yes. All right. Well, I just want to take a minute and thank everyone, especially everyone from the public who wrote into us. Many of those comments were in the packet. Many of them came in today. And also to express my appreciation on behalf of the commission for everyone who spoke tonight. I know it's difficult sometimes to call in, but we really appreciate it. Zoom meetings are what is happening. And I really appreciate that everyone stepped up to the plate and figured out how to do that. We really appreciate your input. Lots of different opinions tonight and a good discussion. And I just want to thank everyone before we move on to the next item. All right, quick time check, 9:24. We have a presentation next. I'll ask that we take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back, Lisa, for the focused general plan update. So 5 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, Chair Garvey, I am here and I'm ready whenever the commission.
I think everybody is here.
Yes, and I have to confess I didn't keep time, but if it has been 5 minutes, it looks like we are good.
Chair Garvey?
Yes.
I would like to state, it seems, oh, Don just called in again. I'll enter him in now.
Let's wait. Thank you for that. I didn't realize he wasn't here.
Hi, Don.
Hi, Bradley here.
All right, Commissioner Bradley, we are ready to move on. The next item on the agenda is a presentation. The presentation on the Focus General Plan Update Project, land use, housing, and environmental safety elements, corresponding zoning ordinance amendments, and an environmental impact report in response to the City Council's strategic objective number 2, study land use and other regulatory options to increase all types of housing, and pursuant to the state mandate to update the San Carlos housing element and state laws to address climate adaptation and resiliency strategies. Lisa, does staff have the presentation?
Yes, we do. Good evening, Chair Garvey and Commissioners. Lisa Porras, Planning Manager. I will be making this presentation to the Commission this evening. And I would just like to start by saying we're very excited to be sharing this information with the Commission as we are just about to embark. And sorry for that extra slide there. That was a backup slide in case we needed it for the last item. We're very excited to be here and to share this project with the Commission and answer any questions you have. What I am intending to do this evening is really to inform you about the project and then give you a little bit of an overview about the project, what the overall schedule looks like, and then talk a little bit about a major component of the project, which again, by reference to the title, is going to include housing, and a little bit more specifically about the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or the RHNA, which you will very often and frequently hear that term, refers to the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And then we also wanted to go over our plans for community engagement and what they might look like, and then some of the next steps. And we have one of our biggest announcements is that our first community workshop actually has been scheduled for November the 30th, which occurs on a Monday, and it's going to be held from 6:30 to 8:30. But I have a slide on that, so we'll touch upon that again as I move forward in the presentation. So I just wanted to talk about a little bit about, well, what is this project really about? The project is intended to update specific elements or chapters or topics of the general plan, which is why we're referring this to this project as a focused general plan update. We're not going to be updating all of the mandated 7 elements that are mandated by state law, which are listed and shown here on the slide, but rather we're really intending to update 3. The first being housing. Our housing element is required to be updated every 8 years. Our current housing element expires in 2023. So what we're doing now is we're starting to work on the next 8-year cycle, which will be from 2023 to 2031. And this is not only a state mandate, it happens to be one of our city's strategic objectives, which was just mentioned by Chair Garvey, which is included in the title of this report, is to ensure that the city provides adequate housing. So this is something that it's quite good that it's a council objective, because it's something that we have to do anyway. And as I get into the presentation, it'll be really important that we have community support for this project, because it's going to be a little bit challenging in moving forward. And I'll describe some of the reasons why, but I think it presents a big opportunity in front of us. The other reason, the other element that we have to update is the environmental safety element. So this element has to do with the environmental factors that could present as safety issues in our community. And one of them is wildfire. So we'll get to discuss that more as part of this project as it progresses. And so the two areas there that are highlighted green are really the primary reasons why we've undertaken this project. Some new laws have been passed that really affect our safety element. So the way that the law is written is that whenever we update our housing element, we have to bring forward with it an update to our safety element. So this is why these are being done concurrently. We know that there's going to be some, probably some significant shifts with housing and what that means to our zoning ordinance. And so that's probably going to engender an update to our land use element. We didn't start the process by saying we need to update the land use element. We started with the housing, but most likely the housing element is going to give rise to the land use element. So these are the three elements of our general plan that we'll be working on as part of this project. As also mentioned in the title, what's also included are zoning ordinance amendments. We want to make sure that we have good housing policies and whatever broad policies that we set forth, we being the city staff working in conjunction with our community, our residents and stakeholders here, as well as our decision makers, whatever we put forward into policy, we want to make sure that those can be implemented. And how we do that is through our zoning ordinance. All of this will be evaluated in accordance with the California Environmental Quality Act, also known as CEQA, and we'll be preparing an EIR for this project as well. So the requirements for updating a housing element have been around for quite a while, for about 50 years. And as shown in this slide, it has been a long-time goal of the state to ensure that there's decent housing and a suitable living environment for every California family. And that this goal is critical to the state's long-term economic competitiveness. So this is not new. Cities have been doing this for quite some time. What is new is what I'm going to get to in a little while later in a couple more slides. So that's an overview and summary of the project as a whole. And what I'd next like to share with the committee is, well, just how long is this going to take us? Well, it's going to take us about 25 months to complete. We started this project in June earlier this year. And although it may seem like not much is happening, it takes some time to kind of get ready and prepare all of our analysis, get our community engagement in line, get a website ready, and have everything set. A lot of work goes into this before the first community workshop is set. Now we're at a point where we can have our first community workshop, but we've been working really hard actually since June to prepare for our first workshop and to make sure that the city staff has collected all of the data necessary to help support and set the context that we need to be able to share with the community. So since from June all the way to July 2022 is when we expect the duration of this project to be, really culminating in the later, like late summer, August, actually June, July of 2022 to bring these projects forward to public hearings. After they go to this project goes to a public hearing, one of the requirements per law says that we have to send the housing element to the State Department of Housing and Community Development, or HCD, as you'll often hear. So basically what the state will do is they will review our document and compare it against state law to make sure that our housing element complies with several components, many components that the housing element needs to be consistent with. So we get ultimately what we're aiming for is a letter from the state that says our housing element has been certified. It's approved by the state and it actually gets a certification letter. And it's really important to get a state compliant housing element because that would put the city in good standing to be eligible to apply for grants and fundings. A lot of the funding these days is tied to having a compliant housing element. So not only is it important for our city to do, it's a goal that we've set forth and kind of have a foundation to build upon, but we want to do it because it puts us in a competitive place to be able to compete for funds should we need them for a wide variety of different implementation measures that could end up in the plan. I'm going to, although this slide does show us a timeline for RHNA, well, let me just pause here. So we have the overall project timeline, but we also have a timeline for a significant component that actually goes into the housing element. And what that is our regional housing needs allocation, or our RHNA timeline. Right now, what we have just received an indication by approval by our Regional Council of Government, or ABAG, the Association of Bay Area Governments. What they recently have done is approved a methodology to determine what San Carlos number of new units how San Carlos should be planning for to the year 2031. And that number is right now, I'm calling it an estimated 2,390 units. And that's estimated simply because once those draft numbers are released, they are reviewed, and there is some time before they're formally adopted. But I will share with the Commission that these numbers are probably not going to change very much. This is a number that we can start to work with as we look into diving deeper into the housing element and how we're going to plan for additional housing units in our community. So what this work, so how we will do work on this project really kind of falls into 6 broad categories. We are coordinating with our consultants, the consultants that the city has entered into a contract with. Their name is MIG, or MIG, and they have multiple offices throughout the state of California, and they might even have a few out of state, perhaps in the state of Oregon. But they've been around for quite a while, and they've worked on other general plan and housing element updates in the Bay Area, but also in Southern California as well. So we make sure we're on the same page and understand what needs to be done. We task them with really gathering a lot of data about our existing conditions in San Carlos, and also to put together some preliminary options that could be useful for our city in particular to look at. And then we start having conversations with the community about those. So the community understands the context, so the community understands the options, and then can begin to have a dialogue with us about where, you know, their preferences are, where they see solutions might be. We also go to another phase where we kind of really dive deeper into a preferred option and do more analysis on that option. Eventually, once we flush through that, we start putting solutions within the general plan. We start preparing draft documents, draft chapters of the general plan, draft sections of amendments or changes to the zoning ordinance, and we start putting together the environmental impact report. The environmental impact report is based upon that project description. So what we ultimately settle on is what the EIR, one of the things that the EIR will look at. The obvious and very big and critical component of preparing such a plan involves our community and stakeholders. And we have started to put together a strategy for how we're going to engage them in ways that we can engage everyone across all different groups in a way where they can have access to the information and really participate in a meaningful way. And then finally, the last stage is really adoption of the final documents. And that is where the draft documents will be coming before the Planning Commission. So all of this will eventually come to you to review these draft sections of the general plan, to review the proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance, and also to consider the environmental impact report. The Planning Commission then would be making a recommendation to the City Council. And again, the City Council has the ultimate decision-making authority for modifications to the San Carlos General Plan and zoning ordinance. the housing element. I mentioned just briefly, and I'll just pause on this again, is that the housing element is one of the 7 mandated elements of the city's general plan. Right now, we're currently in what's referred to as the 5th cycle housing element, and that goes through the year 2015 to 2023. And you can actually see a cover of the document right here on the screen. The housing element was last adopted in May 11th, 2015, and it did receive certification from the state. So moving on from there, what we're really looking at for the next cycle of the housing element update, and we're kind of in a situation, I shouldn't say kind of, we are definitely in a situation where housing is definitely a challenge for a lot of individuals and households, simply due to opportunities for housing, the right types of housing, and housing that is affordable. And this, we know, is something that just doesn't affect San Carlos. This is even countywide, beyond countywide. It really affects our 9-county Bay Area region and even beyond throughout the entire state of California. This is something that has been recognized at the state level, and a series of new housing laws have been passed over the recent years that are essentially going to affect how housing elements are carried out from this point forward, or at least from this point forward for the immediate future. So one of the things that the state is really going to be looking very closely at is our housing sites. Now, I just want to pause for a moment and share that while there may be a number of new units that the city gets assigned, let me just start referencing the number, 2,390 units to the year 2031, it doesn't mean that the city is responsible for building them. The private market does that. And yes, we do partner with nonprofits to get some of the affordable housing built, but essentially it's the private market that is going to come forward and submit an application across our planning counter that we then get to evaluate, review, and decide whether to approve, just like we've done in a lot of different projects that have come before this commission. But what the city needs to do is, as part of this exercise, is to identify where in the city these units should go. So while the state sets the number, the city gets to decide where those units go. And where this is going to be harder for us is that we need to demonstrate that the sites that we identify are actually realistic and feasible sites for housing to occur in the next 8 years. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but this is going to be one of our biggest challenges. We can't just put a dot on a map and say, well, this is where we think it should go. We're going to need to really demonstrate how that site works. And we're going to get to talk a lot about this during the process as it begins. As I mentioned before, our regional housing needs, or RHNA, is significantly higher. I had this slide prepared before, and I was indicating that it would be significantly higher, but now we actually have an estimated number, which is the 2,390 units that just came out. The other interesting challenge, but maybe perhaps it's an opportunity, because we're finding greater numbers of people are actually getting involved in civic engagement, is that we have to change the way that we do civic engagement due to COVID-19 situation that we're in. But the good news is that we really get to test a lot of this technology and online resources and platforms and tools and surveys and live polls that we can do. We have all of these resources available, and we get to test them, and we're going to be able to use them. And our hope is that even more people can attend, because you can just jump online, you can just go to the website, and we're looking at a variety of ways that people can participate. So these are our challenges going forward into this this process that's before us now. As I mentioned before, the regional housing needs allocation, just wanting to pause here a little bit, just to kind of share, where this number comes from. So this number really originates at the state level, And the state, in working with the State Department of Finance, comes up with an estimate for population growth statewide. They then have a methodology where they distribute those numbers to each council of government. There's council of governments all throughout the state. We in our city belong to a council of government that represents the nine counties in the Bay Area, of course, San Mateo being one of those. And the council of governments really works to refine those numbers and figure out how they're going to assign them to each county, and then at the county level, how they're going to assign them to each city. So what we know for sure is that our number for the entire region, our 9-county region, is 441,176 units to the year 2031. And our fair share is the 2,390 units. And what this would look like, now this number further gets broken down, and I think the commission is familiar with this because we've had our annual housing element progress reports kind of present our RHNA progress in this way. But the number is broken down into units per income category. So this slide here shows what those numbers might look like. And I wanted to provide some context by providing our previous RHNA cycle breakdown as well. So as you can see, the total number of our previous RHNA was 596. And those numbers were really broken up into very low. So these are the below market rate categories, starting with very low, low, and moderate. Those represent what we classify as our BMR, below market rate units. And then above moderate is just simply market rate. So you can see that a majority of the units, even in the last cycle, were in the below market rate category. And this continues to be the case as you can start to see how these numbers would be broken down once formally and officially adopted for the upcoming housing element cycle. So 650 units in very low, 370 low, 380 mod, and then 990 above mod for a total of 2,390 units. So how do we meet the RHNA? Well, we look at the sites, as I mentioned before, and some of the factors that we look at. One of the things that we consider is the existing uses on a site. So sort of kind of centered, the centerpiece of this is, again, recognizing that HCD will review the suitability of the sites that we select that, and how they review that suitability is by looking at, well, what's on the current site right now? Is it something old? Is it something underutilized? Is there a realistic potential that this land could be recycled and redeveloped into housing at some time during the 8-year planning period? What is the size of a site? Now, HCD does have set some limits and standards for what is a reasonable sized site. Are there any ownership patterns? Is the ownership really bifurcated, or might there be a site where there's multiple parcels but under the same ownership? So they kind of do a deep dive and they kind of take a look at that realistic potential. And then obviously, what would the zoning allow? And what is the density or assigned density or the intended density for a particular site? All these factors go into determining how the city will meet its regional housing needs allocation. Now, this slide here shows the available sites that were identified during the last housing element update. And over on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the map with the blue with parcels that are highlighted in blue, which represents underutilized sites, and then the parcels that are highlighted in orange or that peach color, which are identified as vacant. So what can be clearly seen is that there's not a lot of vacant land in the city, zoned residential or mixed use, that can just be, it's just waiting for development. Most of our sites that we used during the last housing element update were sites that were considered to be underutilized, meaning they were older development and what the zoning allowed was far greater than what was currently built on the site. So that's how we identified them as underutilized. However, we're going to have to do much more this time during the housing element, this particular update, as I mentioned before, will want to know, the state will want to know, well, if you're identifying that large parcel, tell us more about it. Is there a developer that's potentially interested in the site? What's really happening with that site? So we're going to have to prove to the state that these sites are really feasible. So that's where it gets a little bit more challenging for us during this particular update. The other thing I wanted to mention is that our approach is going to be taking a very close look at our zoning map and looking at the sites that are already allowing residential to occur on them. And this is our starting point because it's already been a long-standing decision made through previous general plans and the last general plan update, which was done in 2009, that these lands are intended to be residential. So we want to take a really good look at our residential zone land to see if it can, what can be done to allow the accommodation of those additional units. So how do we meet the below market rate unit? Well, there's different housing typologies, of course, that run across a range of different housing types, even the housing types that you may see in our city, which is the single family development. Some developments a little bit more rural, maybe some of it's located on larger lots, as we'll see in some of the RS3, on some of the RS3 parcels, which is our lowest density parcel. And then, of course, the RS6 being the most predominantly predominant zoning for housing, which is our single family housing. And then there's other housing types such as duplexes and fourplexes. We, as you know, we are moving forward our ADU ordinance, our accessory dwelling units. As you remember, they are allowed to be counted towards our RHNA. And then we have multifamily housing. So this is just kind of a broad spectrum of the different typologies that we can start to look at and see, what are some opportunities there. And one of the factors that really sort of, is maybe redundant to state is that our density, or greater density, is actually going to equal affordability because we don't have the land to accommodate affordable housing in a single family context. It really needs to be in using land efficiently where we can really maximize the number of units on a lot. That's where we're going to get the affordable units in place. So that's something that we'll need to consider as we move forward. So ultimately, what we're aiming for, which is represented right here in the big circle in the middle of the slide, is both an HCD compliant housing element, but also an element that is supported by the community. And this is really important because as we implement this housing element, the new updated housing element that we'll get to that will get adopted in 2022, and as it gets implemented in the years following, it's really important to have the community support the housing element, to understand the decisions that were made, to be part of those decisions that were made in the housing element. So as development comes forward thereafter, they're understanding about why it's being proposed, why development is coming forward, and really can even become an advocate for housing that is much needed in our city and across many cities in the county and the Bay Area region. But all of these kind of what's circling this lofty goal is all of the factors that go into it. How we get there is really complying with new housing laws. And in each of the workshops, we're going to be able to dive deeper into some of those housing laws. And one housing law that I wanted to share with the commission this evening is this law, which we often refer to as the no net loss of housing. So basically what that means is if we identify a site that is at a maximum density limit and a developer comes forward and they produce a project at that maximum density that our zoning has set forth, should they be denied the ability to reach the maximum density, and maybe it's some lesser density for a number of factors or reasons or findings that are part of the record, then what we have to do then is find a location where we're going to make up for the loss of those units that could have otherwise been achieved under that maximum density. So that's why we call it the no net loss law, because if a developer again comes in with the max, the law says they get to build the max, and if the city doesn't allow it for some reason, we have to say, okay, well, those 20 units or whatever the delta is, we have to figure out where we're going to put those units. So that's just an example of one of the new laws that has been set by the state. I mentioned non-vacant sites. We're going to have to really kind of explain how we're coming up with those. We need to make sure the sites are appropriate. We're going to need to take a close look at any constraints that we may have towards housing development. And so we look at constraints, both governmental constraints. Constraints could be, maybe we have a high percentage of open space or a high percentage of landscaping or high parking requirement, and all these things kind of are working together to make it difficult to meet the maximum density allowed. So we want to take a good close look at what are some of the constraints that we have and how might we modify those to make it easier to facilitate the production of housing. There's fair housing laws that we need to support. And so all of these things are kind of circling around this housing element that we need to prepare for. So moving on to community engagement. So here's just an example of the goals that we've started to set in place and how we work with the community. It's really important for us working forward that we build relationships. We're looking to create multiple opportunities for the public to get engaged and really understand this project. And for anyone who's interested in aspects of the project related to housing, land use, and environmental safety. So we're looking at what are the broad range of things that we can do to really build the relationship within the community and get them plugged in and engaged on this process. We want to make sure that all residents have the ability to participate, to influence the future of their community and their city. So we want to provide opportunities for inclusive participation. So even for those that maybe can't get access to a computer, we're looking at a variety of different options, given that we can't meet in person. And sometimes meeting in person provides that opportunity for those that may not otherwise have access via online engagement. We want to inform the decision-making process. So we want to reach out to stakeholders and the public at large and really make sure we're getting community feedback and input that's representing, the local values that are shared across this community, and that information allows the decision makers enough information to be able to make a decision on the drafts that come before them. And then again, like I mentioned before, we want to build long-term civic engagement. So we want to make sure that those that get engaged are engaged into the future, that they learn more about city operations, about housing in general, and how they can be advocates in the future, or really, and even just beyond that, to understand how to get engaged and how to stay involved in seeing this plan through. So some of the community engagement methods that we've started to work with and talk about with our consultants are really focusing on, of course, the digital activities, such as video conferencing, and also employing web-based tools. What are some tools that we can really embed into our website that allow people to participate when it's convenient for them? And as well as, what tools what surveys can we utilize, and any other web tools that we can use to make a really robust experience for civic engagement on that web platform. We also want to make sure that we're providing for real-time participation, and we want to be flexible with respect when it comes to to being able to participate. So there may be some things where we actually, like for November 30th, we're going to have an actual workshop, and we're going to want people to participate in that. And just like we're doing right here on the screen, and we'll have a number of people participate in that. And I don't know if some of you, I think some of you may have watched or participated in the recent online workshops that we've had for the climate mitigation and adaptation plan, so you can have a sense of how that goes. We're looking to kind of follow the same structure. We will expect that participation will increase over the life of this project as more and more people begin to learn about it, as more and more people understand some of the decisions that are going to be made, and understand that they have an ability to take part and participate in the process and put their stamp on the plan. So it's just something that we expect to happen along the way. Later on in the process, we're going to be using tools to help us visualize potential development. We're looking at all possibilities to create really robust visualizations and simulations. And then who knows, maybe within a year, or it's hard to really say, but as safety protocols permit, if there's opportunity to put some civic engagement tools or posters or other means to participate in a real physical setting, we'll be looking at that. So we really want to be agile and be preparing for all the options that may be before us, even as these times ahead of us continue to change. So some of the key activities that we're going to be working on. So one big announcement is that our website has been officially launched. This went out in a council newsletter that the Planning Commission may have received a notice about, but all of the city council newsletters are available online. And we had one that just went out last Friday that announced the launch of the project website. Our project website is sancarlos2040.org. We've created a new logo. So as you see this logo around, we're going to use it frequently and often to let people know whenever there's an event coming up or something that we want to get their attention on. We have a logo in place. I will share that on this website, our first survey has now been launched, so you can actually go to the website and take the survey. You can encourage your friends and neighbors, business colleagues, and associates to visit this website as well. Another thing that we're doing to inform the community is putting together a Spotlight community newsletter. The Planning Commission may be familiar with the City of Good Living newsletter, the quarterly newsletter, but we also put out what we call the Spotlight newsletter. And the Spotlight really highlights just one topic where we get to dive into it a little bit deeper than the space afforded to us on our community newsletter, which shares a variety of different topics. So we're going to be sending out a Spotlight community newsletter, and this goes out to every resident. So this is going to be issued during the 1st of November. And in that issue, we will be advertising our first workshop. And again, save the date. The first workshop, again, is November 30th. It's on a Monday night, and it's from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m. So we are doing social media posts. The city is using its Nextdoor, Twitter, and Facebook accounts to put out postings about this upcoming workshop and the launch of the project website. So one of the things that we're going to be doing is with our workshop that we're going to be having, we're also going to be pairing it with web-based activities for those who are not able to attend. And the website that you see for this project is only going to grow and become more robust as the project progresses and advances through the different phases and stages it needs to go through. We also recognize, lastly, on this slide, is that our community is really used to reaching out to us. It's been many times in the past where they can just pick up the phone and call us in our regular offices to have a discussion, or they have questions, or they just want to kind of have that one-on-one personal attention. And, you know, there's been cases where some groups or some neighbors get together and they say, we really heard, we heard about this project and we just want to meet with staff to kind of have a conversation. And we've had meetings in the past where people could come in and we set a conference room aside to have those conversations with our community. So we're used to our community really wanting that personal touch. So one of the things that we're going to be doing, as an example, is to offer telephone hours where there are certain times where they know they're going to be able to call in and get connected to staff and to be able to have a conversation and really be heard. We really want to make sure that we are seen as being available, that, you know, it's not just some website that you have to read on your own and you're kind of navigating this by yourself. If there's any questions or conversations that need to happen, that we want to definitely make ourselves available for that. So what are the next steps? Well, right now we are currently working on a number of what we're calling technical documents. We're putting together an existing conditions atlas, which is really taking an existing conditions picture about the city and really going to help set the context and the foundation for our city so that when we begin to have conversations with the community, they understand, well, where are we at today? You know, what does our zoning and land use look like today? And what do we have to work with today? And then taking a look at where we need to go. We also tasked our consultants with doing a policy and results comparison report, where we're taking a look at some of the best policies and practice and results where cities have actually built the affordable housing projects, and what is it that really took what did it take to get these projects, you know, on the ground and built? And we really want to look at some really good case studies and see where people have been successful and what can we learn from that. And is there anything in there that we may want to consider as part of our process going forward? We also are going to be putting out an opportunities and constraints. This sounds like basic planning verbiage, but we want to really identify, you know, where are there current opportunities in our city where we can actually start to look at putting more housing, and where are there constraints, and what are those constraints, and why are they constraints, and what do those look like? So we want to get that. We also need to understand what does our available land look like. We want to be able to share with the community every site that might be vacant. We know they're getting used up more and more, but there are a few left. And where are the underutilized sites, and why are we identifying them as underutilized, and what does it mean to even be an underutilized site? This is a big part of the discussion that we want to share with the community. And then on top of all of that, we want to prepare a financial feasibility analysis, because it's one thing to kind of have these ideas, but we need to really test some cases to make sure that anything that we may want to change in the future is realistic from a financial feasibility perspective. So these documents are coming up in the fall, and they will be used to help provide some context for the workshop coming up on November 30th. And we're going to really encourage folks to at least familiarize themselves. We are not asking people to be experts, but we want them to sort of prepare for the workshop so that we can make it a very efficient workshop and make sure that people really have a basic or a base foundation before entering into that workshop. It won't be required that they need to read through all of these and understand them perfectly, but we do and we will be encouraging that. And then lastly, we just want to encourage the commission, yourselves, to let your neighbors know about this project, your friends in the community, any business associates you might have. We really are looking for everyone in our community to really help spread the word. So we're going to be doing our part and working with our community outreach team here at the city and to utilize all of the tools we have, and then really start thinking out of the box and looking for more ways to engage and really reach out to specific groups, and we've actually already started doing that. Our consultants have done that, and they've had some interviews, even with some folks, to even say, you know, here's who we should reach out to. So a lot of work has been done now prior to this workshop, but it's really only the very beginning, and much more needs to be done. So I think I'm going to stop there and answer any questions you may have. But again, there's no action required by the Planning Commission this evening. This is just really a presentation to inform you about the project, the basic schedule, some of the challenges and opportunities that we have going forward. And then most importantly is that we have our first workshop set for November 30th. So we're happy that we've identified that date and we can announce it to the commission so we can start getting the word out on that. So thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. That was a lot of information that was so well presented. That was just beautifully done, and I learned so much. I cannot get my arms around 2,390 units. That just seems like an enormous number. How many units are in the Trellis apartment development as a comparison? I'm just trying to get my arms around this number.
I believe it's 202 or 203, but it's one of those two.
Okay. Yeah, 20, that's just such a big number.
So that's 10% of 2391.
Right.
So we need 10 projects like that, or a lot of ADUs and junior ADUs.
I like the logo. I like the idea that Spotlight will be highlighting this. I'm open to talking with my neighbors and participating in the workshop. I think the rollout of this has been really good. The one question I had is on the EIR. This is an EIR for the whole project, right? This does not negate environmental impact reports that might be needed for individual projects. This simply looks at things like traffic impacts holistically for 2,390 units. It doesn't supplant the need for individual EIRs in the future on individual projects. Have I got that close to right?
Pretty close. I will say that the last time the city prepared an EIR for its general plan, it was a programmatic EIR. And essentially what that means is that it's pretty broad and comprehensive, and it really contemplates that expected level of growth so that it's not totally necessary to do CEQA on every project coming forward. There's also provisions under CEQA that says if this is classified as an infill project, and if the project is consistent with the general plan, it doesn't need CEQA. But there could be other factors that a project could give rise to studying further under CEQA law. And that could be, maybe there's a biological resource or some other key component that needs to be evaluated. So, again, but to get back to your question, yes, it'll be looking at the overall impacts associated with that level of growth.
Thank you. That was very helpful.
Lisa, I think on our next agenda, we're going to get to the East Side study. I'm not sure if that's the right phrase, but I think you know what I mean. And it seems like in terms of opportunity for creative ways to rethink about zoning and mixed use, as well as that map alone, which looked at maybe underutilized properties, a lot was in that area. It just strikes me that these pieces of work not only can't be delinked, but they need to be like deeply linked in order to create new ways of creating parcels for higher density and a lot more housing in it. So I'm sure you've thought a lot about this. Just appreciate any insights.
a big part of that is kind of taking, like I mentioned previously, is that where our starting point is to really not miss the opportunity to look at where our what may be possible using the land that's already zoned residential. So that's where we're going to start. And if it comes to a point where there's going to be some challenges, or it's very difficult as a community to support whatever changes might be necessary to accommodate it all on the land that's already zoned residential, we'll have to have that discussion. But I think my reaction or I guess response to that is, we'll have a discussion on all of that. I mean, it'll come up. But where we're starting from, without making big broad leaps, is to really take a look at the land where it's already zoned residential and then go from there. I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, you did, but I think, I'm now the implications of what you just shared are different than I guess I had in mind. And okay, so I get it. There'll be work to do to take the existing portfolio of residential land, most of which is not vacant, and accommodate, if we were to meet all, another 2,400 housing units in that existing footprint. And that is no light touch change for our city, is it?
I would agree that there's going to, there will be, changes upon us. That is a challenge, correct. Because one of, not just our city, but many cities, you might say, well, we're built out, there's development on every parcel. But the question is, we're not looking to really build out. It's really about building up in the locations that are deemed appropriate. We have to have that conversation with our community. We've had conversations in the past about that, which is why you see the mixed use and higher density along El Camino Real and in certain places around the downtown. But then the question is, well, is there opportunity to look at that again and see if we might want to adjust anything there that's going to make us able to meet our future housing needs. So that's a conversation that we'll have to have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Definitely interesting to see that whole process laid out. And part and parcel, of course, is all that good community engagement that you're planning for and enlisting us to help you with. I guess what, but as I kind of saw that timeline, this is obviously, going to be very impactful upon San Carlos, a lot of considerations. But it kind of, from my perspective, it boiled down to, staff is going to work through this big process, engage community, iterate, but, in month 25, the Planning Commission will kind of get the first look at the outcome of that. And I guess I would just ask, I view the Planning Commission as representatives of the community, and all that good outreach is great, but it's a planning commissioner's role to have some of that heartbeat of the community, but then also have the focus to be able to dive a little deeper and have some more concrete input than perhaps an average citizen might have the time or availability to do. So I guess I would just ask, how do you see the role of the Planning Commission through this process? And, it just seems like it would be not fully using what the Planning Commission could bring to bear to hold the results until month 25 and then kind of share the outcome with them.
Yeah, I'm really, really glad you asked, because that allows me to touch on something that I didn't mention, is that the Planning Commission is definitely going to hear about this project, be involved in this project all along the way, and not just at the very end when a draft document comes before you. And so what we are planning to do is hold study sessions with the Planning Commission. So there will be certain study sessions. We'll make progress with with the public at large, but we also want to be having study sessions with the Planning Commission and getting feedback from the commission along the way. So, and then of course, in addition to the study sessions, staff will be in a position to provide regular updates to the commission on, the events that are happening, or we had this workshop and, here's some of the things that we heard from the community. We're posting everything online. We want, here is it here. We can go over this with you, but also for the website. So we're going to be in very close and active communication with the commission. This is not something that just we want to do in a vacuum, and at the end of those 22 months come to you and say, here's this document, please make your recommendation. So thanks for asking the question and allowing me to kind of share a little bit more, but absolutely, and I fully agree.
Oh, terrific. That sounds good. I think, deep study sessions like that would be beneficial, and even the one or two workshops or whatever we call it when it's, not when it's kind of us meeting offsite a little bit, if you know what I mean. What did we call that we did in January? Was that a workshop, or maybe it wasn't January, but when we all met above the library, that session?
I'm trying to remember.
Kind of a mini retreat.
Yeah, mini retreat. I would just say maybe one or two mini retreats or whatever that forum was, in addition to study sessions, would from my perspective, I think would be useful through that process.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and if there's any other ideas that commissioners have, feel free to send me an email and share your thoughts. Like if there's something specific, or like this would be a really great way to utilize the commission. I want to hear from the commission. There could be specific things that you want to know about or interested in not missing, perhaps. We want to just keep the communication lines open. So if there's some thoughts that you have, feel free to send those to me as we move forward with this project, as we tailor the opportunities for study sessions or whatever else we might want to do with the commission or call them. It will be good to have your thoughts on that. Happy to receive them.
One thing that jumped out at me was on packet page 15, the strategic plan outline. At the bottom paragraph, the strategic plan process, city council, mini retreat, city council, city manager, city attorney. It seemed to me, since it's about strategic planning, that the director of community development or the planning manager and the chair of the planning commission, or at least a member, might well be involved in that, since it is about strategic planning. And you guys are staff planners and we're planning commissioners.
Yes, Commissioner Bradley, I believe you're referring to the strategic plan that was included in your packet as an attachment. So as you may recall, the City Council, as part of its strategic retreat, had recently, or I guess it was the first time that we had done it, except we didn't do it this year per their direction because of, things were kind of being held in status quo. That's my understanding. But at any rate, when they get convened for their strategic retreats, they were interested and still are interested in getting input from the commission. So that's the reason why we had the mini retreat with the Planning Commission, and we carried forward all of your thoughts and comments and discussion items to them for their consideration during their strategic retreat.
Thank you.
I was struck, like the others, by the magnitude of the challenge in front of us, and curious about the inventory and what constitutes underutilized and what the potential impact would be and what the opportunity is. I mean, is the underutilized mean converting single family residence areas into multifamily, or is it what makes, you don't have to give me an answer now, but I think that would be an area that myself and a lot of residents would have curiosity about is what the change would be. And then the other part about when you're thinking about, well, we need more space for housing, the East Side does come up. And so why that is a sort of a off limits, at least initially in the thinking, I'm curious to know what's driving that focus on the on what's currently zoned residential as opposed to what seems like quite a bit of space in the light industrial area.
I would just respond to your last point. It's that it's not necessarily off limits. It's just not the starting point. Maybe I can clarify it that way. Mm-hmm. And then to your first point about underutilized, we're not looking at converting single family housing, to a higher or different type of zoning district. Mm-hmm. Underutilized could mean, let's say, for example, you have a commercial property with a single story retail space that's surrounded by, quite a bit of parking. So you have that current condition, but then the zoning allows you to go 4 stories. So that's an example of what can be considered underutilized because that site is not being used to its maximum potential. That's just an example. So maybe something could happen there where that retail store could still be on the ground floor and then you have housing above. That's an easy one.
Yes. Yeah, that would be a good one. But it makes sense. But I think that's, as we collect feedback and also message what the challenge is to make people comfortable with it, we want to be sure to address concerns that changing the character of our community in drastic ways. I suspect that it may not be really necessary. I mean, the solution you just mentioned, for instance, would be a relatively low impact.
Yeah, these are great, all part of the discussion that we will have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to be exciting, really. It's going to be exciting to be a part of the Planning Commission through this process. It's going to be exciting to see what MIG comes up with and to be a part of the community engagement process. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be challenging, but I think it's also going to be productive. And we're not in this alone. I think all of our neighboring cities on the peninsula and in the region are going to be going through a similar exercise. So in a way, that makes it even more exciting. We're not in this alone.
The whole state.
Yeah, well put, yeah. Any other questions of Lisa on this most excellent presentation? All right, hearing none. Lisa, I don't believe there's any action required on the part of the commission. So thank you very much for that very informative presentation. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, moving on to the next agenda item, report on recent city council.
Through the chair, could we just check and see if there happened to be anybody on the call for this?
Thank you. I neglected that. This is an opportunity if there's anyone from the public who wants to speak on the general plan update presentation. Sarah, is there anyone in the waiting room?
Not at this time.
All right, thank you very much for that. Now moving on, report on recent city council actions.
Yes, I will share with the commission that a week ago on Monday, the city council voted to introduce an ordinance to amend the zoning ordinance in consideration of accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. So there were no changes made to the Planning Commission's recommendation, aside from just a few factors that we had reviewed legally. So that one is moving forward, and it's set to be introduced on this coming Monday, which is October the 26th. And then the new regulations would be in effect November 25th. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item, Planning Commission comments or reports. Any comments or reports from fellow commissioners? Hearing none, we'll move on to correspondence. Any correspondence that we have, Lisa?
None for this evening other than those additional emails or public comments that were on the previous agenda item that have been forwarded to all of my commissioners, and those will be copied and put in the record in the file.
Thank you for that. Yes, we did receive those. And lastly, planning staff comments, reports, and updates on current projects.
Yes, so just a couple of things. Our next Planning Commission hearing will be on Monday, November the 2nd. And on the agenda for that evening will be proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance for childcare. So this is another component that the city has decided should take some precedence and priority. So staff will be bringing forward amendments to promote, essentially make it easier to get childcare in our community. And there's a number of different things that we can do to support that. So that'll be on the commission's agenda for November the 2nd. And then in addition to that, as the commission may remember, will be a presentation on the East Side Innovation District Vision Plan. So that is coming forward on the 2nd. And like the general plan was a presentation tonight, we'll have a presentation on November the 2nd on the East Side.
All right, thank you very much. I think that's it for tonight. Any last comments before we adjourn? All right, this meeting is
Good job, Lisa. Good job, Ellen.
Thanks, everybody. Good meeting. See you next
time. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Be safe.